Iraq, a war zone where men walked through smoke, dust, and blood. Soldiers fired their weapons, fighting for their lives, waiting for the air support that was supposed to arrive in 5 minutes and the convoy in 15. Casualties were constant. First aid had been applied, but the men had already lost too much blood. The leader of the area knew he was in a difficult situation. Even a sandstorm would be better than this. Something was spotted on the horizon, causing one of the soldiers to scream for the sergeant with horror in his eyes. When the sergeant turned and saw what the soldier had seen, the same horror overcame him. It was a grenade launcher pointing directly at the group. The soldier knew it was too late to take down the shooter, but to his surprise, he was hit directly in the head and knocked down. The soldier wondered if it was friendly fire. Perhaps the reinforcements had arrived. Scanning the surroundings with the sight of his weapon, he understood, turned to the group, and announced that their location had been exposed, and there was an enemy sniper. The situation was only getting worse. It was hard to tell where the attacks were coming from, and it was impossible to hold out for much longer. The wall of their hiding place was bombarded with gunfire. The sergeant crouched for cover and ordered everyone to go to the other building. They were under attack. The soldiers ran, leaving their equipment behind as they fled for their lives. Elsewhere, the sniper watched, focused, his scope pointed at the group's building. As one of them fired, the sniper took aim and shot with precision. The bullet swiftly cut through the air, crossing the combat area until it hit the other shooter in the head. Inside the building, the group of soldiers advanced in formation, helping their wounded to walk. An explosion rocked the location, and they moved to the next point as fast as they could. They were met with a hail of gunfire and returned fire. The sergeant asked about the situation outside, and they replied that more enemies were approaching. The gunfire was continuous, and ammunition was running out. After reloading one last time, there was no more left. They were at a breaking point. Another group of enemies approached. Their numbers were only growing, and it made the soldiers wonder if this would be their end. The sergeant turned to shoot, with only one certainty in mind. If he was going to meet his end here, he would take at least one of them with him. For a brief moment, his vision caught a pin flying through the air. It was a grenade being thrown in his direction by one of the enemies. The place exploded, swept by flames. Bodies piled up, and the remains of the grenades rolled on the ground. Another group approached, sweeping the area through the smoke, thinking there were no survivors, when someone emerged from the shadows, a hand over one of the soldiers' mouths and a knife at his throat. One down. Before the next one could realize what was happening, the shadow advanced with a hand over his mouth and a knife in his chest. 2 down. The next one shot desperately, realizing what was happening, but in the blink of an eye, he saw the shadow rush towards him and strike him with the blade at his throat. 3 down. The remaining men began to fire in every direction, trying to hit him. The shadow moved swiftly, eliminating everyone in its path with precision, twisting and cutting, leaving only the trail of its movements behind. Smoke engulfed the place, spreading, while the remaining soldiers from the initial group hid. Someone was fighting their enemies. Whoever it was, they were taking everyone down alone, with gunshots, blades, and physical blows. The enemies fired frantically as he approached and threw them far away, shooting, hitting them even in midair. The group was in shock. He had no heavy equipment, just a pistol and a knife, yet he was taking everyone down. They wondered if he was part of the reinforcements, but the sergeant remained silent, watching. He had heard of that shadow. An Asian man with glasses and a mask, wearing civilian clothes. The bounty on his head was $1.5 million. 2 enemies appeared behind him, about to hit him with their shots, when he turned his thirsty blade toward them. The sergeant knew. He was a mercenary who had won every battle he had participated in. Bodies piled up, falling to the ground before him. There was no doubt. The blue-eyed man with a menacing aura standing in front of him turned before the sergeant could utter his name and threw a knife that grazed his face, hitting an approaching enemy. The mercenary, with a shimmering aura, reprimanded them, saying it was too early to relax. He had no time to deal with corpses. The sergeant was right. He was Khulud, the immortal. Our protagonist looked at them blankly and then turned, giving his back to the squad. One of the soldiers asked why Khulud was there, the one who was part of Team Zero. He kept walking in a direction where the soldiers had warned there were enemies. The sergeant, however, stated that he would follow him. The soldiers tried to argue, saying it was too much even for Khulud, but the sergeant assured them that if that guy was really Khulud, then his teammates must be with him. When they left the building, what they found was a floor painted with bodies and blood. They were met by armed men who announced, "Point B is secure." That was the private military company, Team Zero. Just as the sergeant had predicted, Khulud and his team were there. What he didn't know was the reason. A man with a red beard greeted Khulud, asking if he had been okay alone. After all, there must have been a lot of enemies. Khulud patted the man on the shoulder and said that he had already taken care of several himself. Now he needed him to take care of the team for him. He also thanked Gerald, the redhead, for everything he had done up to that point. The sergeant stepped forward and tried to reach Khulud to ask some questions, but he was interrupted by Gerald, who looked at him seriously, saying he hoped he wouldn't interrupt, because that was Khulud's retirement ceremony. While the soldiers looked on in complete shock, Gerald pleaded, "Please, juniors, you didn't see anything today." Khulud in turn just kept walking towards the horizon, through the smoke and the sun's glare, until he disappeared. Sometime later, a newspaper reported the death of President Lee Junhyun of the Daesung Group. In a luxurious traditional residence, the ceremony was taking place. Wreaths were scattered across the courtyard, while photographers fired flashes, wondering who a mysterious person walking toward the coffin was. None of them recognized the man, but only relatives were allowed. The young man with black hair and broad shoulders continued walking towards the president's photo on the coffin. A man and a woman dressed in black were waiting in silence. When the woman spotted the approaching young man, she recognized him. It was the young master of the house. The man beside her narrowed his eyes in anger. Lee Jung-hwan was alive after all. The young man continued walking to the coffin in silence, until the man approached him, asking where he had been for the past 6 years. Our protagonist replied that he had been wandering around. The man looked at him angrily and with a menacing posture said, "Brother, this is not a place for you to come. Do you know how much noise reporters like to make, and you still come here?" Our protagonist replied, "Even if you are an ungrateful son showing up after 6 years, shouldn't you at least pay your last respects?" The man raised his hand in irritation and questioned, "Aren't you ashamed, talking nonsense about someone trying to kill you and then disappearing? Do you know how much chaos there was when you disappeared?" Jung-hwan reminded his brother that their mother had had delusions after that, and asked him to understand. The brother said he was glad he had come to his senses, and the woman next to him tried to talk to him, but he soon got closer to the young man and said, "If the reporters find out you suddenly appeared after disappearing, our family's shame will be exposed." Jung-hwan interrupted him, saying that from now on he would just pay his respects as a common mourner and leave. The brother was annoyed by the interruption, but the young man continued in silence, lighting the incense and bowing in front of the coffin. In his mind, he apologized to President Lee Junhyun, saying that this could be considered his karma, the death of his mother and those who had stolen his life. He himself would make them pay, even if they were his own blood. After he finished, the brother asked if he planned to leave again, and our protagonist replied that he wasn't. He was tired of wandering around. The brother made a sarcastic comment, saying that sometimes it could be more comfortable away from home, and our protagonist replied that he was trying to get comfortable now that he had found the courage to return. He had had a difficult time away and wanted to resume his failed career. The brother looked at him angrily and reprimanded him. He had disappeared before, even after he already had a job, and now he wanted to go back to being a prosecutor. The reporters would tear the Daesung Group and their father's name to shreds. Even chaebol heirs avoided appearing in public. It was then that Jung-hwan replied, "Oh, I was also a chaebol heir. Did you forget? What your mother wanted and my dream was also to become a prosecutor." The brother gritted his teeth in anger at that bastard. He had to take responsibility for his choices. He took a deep breath and ordered Secretary Kim, a man who was behind him, to contact the prosecutor's office and get ready, in addition to investigating if there was any hidden motive behind Jung-hwan's return. The woman next to him asked if he was going to ask for his mother's share of the inheritance, and he replied that Jung-hwan had always been a mysterious man, so it was possible. Secretary Kim called the vice president but soon corrected himself, calling him president. He turned, asking what it was, and the secretary replied that he hadn't been able to find Jung-hwan when he had disappeared. So if he tried now, there would be limits on the information. The man approached him with an expression full of hatred and said that he hadn't actually found him, not that he hadn't been able to. He just hadn't tried hard enough. If he had, he would have found him. The secretary took a step back as the president accused him of being complacent and allowing Jung-hwan to return. If their father were alive, he might even divide the inheritance. He needed to find out if he had contacted any executives during that time, and if so, who and what did they do. He needed to find out everything, what he ate, where he slept, and with whom he slept. He had to use every means necessary. Secretary Kim replied that he understood and felt a bit awkward, thinking, "I thought I would never have to contact them again. This is problematic." Jung-hwan was now leaving the place, walking down the stairs, accompanied by a man who said, "It's been 6 years since you disappeared in Lyon. Do you know how much we looked for you? We even filed a missing persons report. If you have nowhere to go, I'll book a hotel for you, so stay as long as you want." Our protagonist replied that he was tired of hotels. He preferred places that smelled of people. Then he asked if he could stay at his colleague's house, which must be very spacious. The man burst out laughing and said, "Very spacious indeed. I'm an executive at the Daesung Group, you know. I'll send you the address. Come anytime. And your phone?" Jung-hwan took his phone and put in his number, then said he would pay for the rent so it wouldn't be free. The man asked where he would get the money and pressed the phone's microphone, saying he had earned a little when he was away. Returning the phone to his friend, he said he would see him later. The young man asked if he still wanted to work as a prosecutor and said that the vice president and other executives would not be happy about it. The vice president thought he was suspicious, and there was no evidence linking the Daesung group to the death of Jung-hwan's mother. Jung-hwan turned to the horizon and asked if that meant it had all been an accident, if he had to give up and look for something else. The man replied that he was just worried about him, but Jung-hwan assured him that 6 years had already passed. During that long time, he had endured with determination to survive. If not, he would not have returned to Korea. The man commented that he had changed a lot, and that if he was so determined, he wouldn't stop him. In silence, he watched him, thinking about how it wouldn't be easy for Jung-hwan. Just like when his mother had died and everything had been taken from him, the law would never be on his side. Our protagonist rode a train into the sunset. Looking out the window, he thought, to Lee Jong-byum, who became president of the Daesung group, I'm the last remaining threat. He must know why I came to Korea. He must have pulled strings with the prosecutor's office too. He would have blocked every way for me to execute my plan, so I'll bring in public opinion. He took out his cell phone and called someone who answered, identifying himself as reporter Kim Sang-gu. Jung-hwan didn't need to identify himself. As soon as he greeted the reporter recognized him and asked if he was back in Korea. Jung-hwan replied that this wasn't a war call. He could call him by his name and not Kalud, and he congratulated him for recognizing him. Sang-gu laughed, saying he couldn't forget his voice, and asked what he wanted. Our protagonist asked if they could meet, and the reporter replied that he was on a business trip, so it would be difficult. Jung-hwan said it was a shame and that he had something to ask in person. Sang-gu smiled and asked if it was time to pay what was owed. If it was a request from Kalud, he would find a way to make it happen. Jung-hwan replied that he had already paid what was owed by not publishing a certain story. Sang-gu asked if that was enough and questioned what he wanted him to do. Our protagonist replied that it was nothing major. He just wanted a hot story, straight from the public relations desk. Sang-gu asked what kind he wanted, and Jung-hwan replied that he wanted a crime, something big. Sang-gu sat down in front of his notebook and smiled, saying it sounded dangerous. Even retired, the great Kalud still wanted to do something new. In a few seconds, Sang-gu said he had a case involving children and asked if it was to Jung-hwan's liking, who said it would do. The reporter explained that recently, there was a school crime that shook the country. There were suspects, but the witnesses and evidence had disappeared. He didn't know whose child was responsible, but the police were going crazy. He knew that a school violence case might be a bit small for Kalud, but it was the hottest topic until recently. Our protagonist smiled, satisfied. The culprit was irrelevant. What was important was the sensational value of the case. He said he liked it, and Sang-gu replied that he would send him the details, celebrating being able to see Kalud's skills in action after so long. The twilight was still painting the sky when Jung-hwan sat down on a park bench and began to analyze the details of the case on his phone. The case had happened in Korea itself. A boy named Choi Gyu-seon from the 3rd year, class 8 of Jongjin School had sexually assaulted his classmate Jeon Hyemin for 3 months and forced her into prostitution. The accomplices were 4 male students from the same class. The investigation results only recognized threats and insults through social media. Then, one day, Jeon Hyemin's alcoholic father made a deal with the accomplices, and the final punishment from the school violence committee was just 12 hours of school service. In the end, the investigation concluded this way. The victim's testimony was essentially ignored. Even though it had become a problem that angered the entire nation, the case quieted down soon after, and the victim still attends the same school as the accomplices. This is enough to attract attention as my first case. Jung-hwan smiled, looking at the sky. The light of the sunset illuminated him, and his plans would go into action. A few moments later, 2 of the accomplices were being driven to school, while they complained about hiding and cursed the girl for having reported the case. Among themselves, they laughed at the father for having sold his daughter in a deal for money. That's why messing with the poor was easy. Even so, they knew that, for now, until the dust settled, they needed to stay quiet and hope it didn't turn into something worse. Rolling his eyes in dissatisfaction, one of them asked if they would have to look for a new toy, and the other laughed, saying he seemed disappointed. They started shouting at each other, complaining that the girl was high quality. Suddenly, the car braked out of nowhere upon seeing someone stopped in the middle of the street. The driver stuck his head out and yelled if the guy wanted to die standing there. Jung-hwan, who was the man in the street, replied, placing his hand on the hood, saying he was Hyemin's uncle. The drivers got out of the car, cursing our protagonist. One of them, a brute, approached, patting him on the shoulder and saying saying he was busy and would let it slide. He just needed to get out of the way while asking kindly. Jungwon reached into his pocket and pointed his phone at the brute, saying, "Oh my, how scary. We can't have a proper conversation like this, can we? Stop posing and say what you just said again. When you become famous on TV, you won't pretend you don't know me, will you? What did you say before?" The man started to back away with his hand on the screen, complaining, and Jungwon just kept saying, "Say it one more time. Why can't you say you don't know John Hyemin?" The other bodyguard got out of the car and approached him, saying, "Enough. If you act like this, it's hard for us to cooperate. I won't waste time and I'll ask directly. What do you want? It seems you've done this more than once or twice." The brute yelled at him, irritated, saying that the girl's father had already agreed to the deal. An uncle had nothing to do with the case. Jungwon gave a broad smile and held up 2 fingers, saying, 200 to keep my mouth shut and I'll back off easily." The two looked at each other, somewhat disbelieving, then burst out laughing, asking if he really just wanted that and if he knew who he was messing with. The brute led him to the trunk and told him to wait there without trying any funny business. They would confirm his identity and only then would they hand over the money. Our protagonist looked at the car, thinking about how he hated cramped spaces. It wasn't long before another car arrived with a mean-looking man at the wheel. The 2 cars drove through the streets while our protagonist remained quiet and relaxed in the trunk. He used to do ambushes in cramped places as often as he had daily meals. Even so, he didn't get used to it. Outside, he heard someone's voice asking, "Why give money to that kind of people? It was easier to scare them away." The bodyguard yelled at the boy who had said that, saying that those were the president's orders. Everything was to be done with discretion. The bodyguard called the boy Gusion and said that everything was quiet for now, so he needed to be silent. The boy rolled his eyes, annoyed that they were being bothered by such a leech. Our protagonist's expression darkened when he heard Gusion's words, seeing the coldness and indifference with which he viewed the poor. The sun was finishing its set. The cars had arrived at an abandoned location. When the brute opened the trunk, announcing that they had arrived, he didn't have time to scream before our protagonist buried a kick in his throat. The brute coughed, staggering backward, and Jungwon got out of the car, saying mockingly, "Oh, sorry, I didn't know you were standing here in front. The atmosphere here is pretty good. You must have brought guests here often before, haven't you?" Jungwon sat on the hood of the car, feeling the wind, and the brute reacted by running at him while yelling. Our protagonist dodged with ease. That wasn't even the head of security. The brute tried to grab him, but Jungwon hugged his arm, applying a blow and throwing him against the ground, while reprimanding him for trying to pull a knife on him. The brute fell against the car as our protagonist easily took him down. The 2 boys in the car flinched from the impact. The brute was dazed, staring at the sky while our protagonist watched him in silence. Soon he heard the sound of footsteps and realized he wasn't alone. A group of men in suits approached with knives in hand. He turned to them and smiled, saying he didn't know what to do with so much hospitality. He would give them a chance. If they surrendered, he would send them all home safe. The thugs held back a laugh. A camera was filming everything nearby, while what seemed to be their leader approached, saying that whatever scheme he had pulled off just to get $200, it would end up being his death anniversary. Jungwon replied that he was looking forward to it, and the leader gave the order for them to make Jungwon kneel before him. The group of thugs advanced with knives drawn, ready to take down Jungwon. Our protagonist met them all calmly. He had a little beatdown for everyone. The first one took a straight punch and was thrown far away. The next one saw everything and shouted, warning that he was not a normal person. They had to attack together. Jungwon moved his foot and delivered a kick that broke the man on impact. The next one came with a bat, jumping from behind him, and Jungwon turned with a challenging look, hitting the man and throwing him backward. The last of the thugs saw his colleagues piled up on the ground and stopped, trembling. Jungwon looked at him with a cocky smile and asked if he was scared, while inviting him to a fight. The man advanced with his knife raised, screaming, and Jungwon took him down with a single move. Their leader saw his men fallen on the ground and wondered how that was possible. What kind of monster were they facing? Terrified, he raised his voice and asked where he was from. Jungwon looked at him with a deadpan expression and replied that he had already told them. He was Hyemin's uncle. The last thug gave up and ran to the car. Jungwon asked if he was going to flee in such a pathetic way, and the man opened the door desperately, asking Juseon to run. But before he could give more details, our protagonist jumped, planting a kick on the man. The boys flinched inside the car, and Jungwon stood outside looking at them, while the thug was hanging from the car window unconscious. Their leader wondered if he was even human. The entire team had been annihilated by a single guy. Juseon raised his hands, a bit scared, and said, "Oh, sir, you said you needed money, didn't you? 10 million? Would 10 million be enough?" Jung-hwan looked at him with a terrifying aura and ordered him to get down. The boys cowered and asked why he would hit children like them. Asking for money would be enough. Jung-hwan repeated that they should get down. Gyu-seon insisted, saying he didn't need to do that. If 10 million wasn't enough, he could give 20. He had a lot of money. Jung-hwan grabbed the boy by the collar and pulled him, while he screamed, and with an aura of pure revolt, he said, "When Hyemin asked, why didn't you solve things through negotiation like now?" The boy continued to increase the offer to 25 million, while pulling out a small can. Opening it, he smiled and pointed the pepper spray at Jung-hwan, laughing, saying that he had messed with the wrong guy. Jung-hwan flinched, coughing, and the boy continued to press the spray, asking what the imported spray tasted like. Jung-hwan fell to his knees and the boy coughed, swearing. The spray ran out and the boy looked at the can in disbelief, saying he had thought he was going to die. Our protagonist squeezed his eyes with tears, covering his face with his arms as the smoke dispersed. The boys got out of the car and called for Gyu-seon to leave, saying there was no way to beat a guy like that. However, he turned around, saying that if they left him there, he would continue to haunt them. How long would a guy who fought like that stay on the ground just because of some spray? Gyu-seon took one of the thugs' knives and said they needed to cut his tendons. There were witnesses, so even if the police came, they wouldn't suspect them. The guy could fight, but if they put him out, it would work. The boys agreed and took metal bars, going after Jung-hwan and starting to hit him, one after another, giving Jung-hwan a beating as he remained crouched on the ground, recovering. Gyu-seon approached, saying that on second thought, just that wasn't enough. The guys asked what he wanted, and the boy advanced, saying he would kill him and blame it on the thugs. He raised his knife and brought it down with all his strength, saying he would send his regards to John Hyemin. In the exact moment the knife got close enough, our protagonist grabbed the boy's wrist and held it with one hand. He clenched his fist tightly, making the boy scream in pain and drop the knife to the ground. Gyu-seon became desperate and started yelling for his friends, who ran in response and began to attack Jung-hwan. As they approached, Jung-hwan responded by landing a punch to one of their stomachs and knocking him down. The next one jumped with a metal bar, and Jung-hwan grabbed a nearby knife, throwing it at the boy's forehead with the handle aimed at him. The last one turned and ran away, begging for forgiveness. Jung-hwan replied that it was Gyu-seon who needed to beg for forgiveness, and began to strike the running boy. The boy fell, hit by a metal bar, while Gyu-seon watched everything in shock. He had been defeated so quickly and didn't even understand why. Our protagonist continued to hold the boy's wrist as he knelt before him, saying, "Kids these days are scary, huh? You really tried to kill someone?" Gyu-seon couldn't break free and didn't understand how this man was so strong. Our protagonist took on an even more intimidating posture and said, "Now that I think about it, it's just you left. Can we have a serious talk?" Gyu-seon could only tremble and think about escaping. He repeatedly asked why Jung-hwan was doing this to him, and Jung-hwan replied that if he was asking that, it was because he had lived too comfortably until now. The boy pulled out a cell phone and said he would call the police. Our protagonist let him go with a smile on his face and told him to go ahead. Gyu-seon was in shock on the ground, while our protagonist told him to call if he was curious to see who the police would listen to. The boy didn't understand, not until Jung-hwan smiled, saying, "The word of a mere high school student versus the word of a Korean prosecutor. It's obvious who they'll believe without even looking." Gyu-seon trembled, unable to believe that he was really a prosecutor. Jung-hwan pointed to a nearby camera and said, "And now is not the time to play the victim. Do you see that blinking thing in that car? That's right, the crime of kidnapping a Korean prosecutor with investigative authority. Penal Code Article 278, special imprisonment and confinement. Do you understand the situation now?" The boy retorted, saying that he had started it. But our protagonist smiled at him, saying, "No, I was brought here after being kidnapped. Although it was just an attempt, several people tried to kill me with weapons. In other words, it was self-defense. End this by admitting to all the statements about John Hyemin and turning yourselves in. That's the only way to reduce your sentences." The boy lowered his head, defeated, looking at the ground as he thought, "If he's a prosecutor, even my dad would find him problematic. That's why we resolve things with the police before going to the prosecutor's office. Why on earth is there a prosecutor in front of me?" Jung-hwan pulled the recording chip from the camera and said he would take the files with him. The last thing he told the boy was to think carefully, and then he walked away. The day finally ended over the city. A woman was cooking in her apartment when the doorbell rang. She turned, wiping her hands, and said they had arrived early. She turned to the screen that showed who was at the entrance and saw our protagonist standing there. He identified himself, and she smiled, allowing him in. She welcomed him, asking where he had been all this time, and our protagonist entered the house as she said, "It feels like it was just yesterday that you were following me around calling me auntie. Now I wouldn't recognize you if I saw you on the street. How's your health? Nothing hurts." Jung-hwan replied that he was very healthy, and she guided him to the dining room where more people were seated. A girl sitting sitting there, blushed, looking at our protagonist, thinking, what? Dad said it was a guest, so I thought it was an old man. Who is this handsome guy? Damn it, I'm completely barefaced right now. She stood up, feigning a bit of drama, saying there was an urgent matter at the hospital and left the table, while the other boy laughed and Younghwan looked confused. The boy at the table turned to him, laughing, and said, "Long time no see, Hyung." Our protagonist looked at him in surprise and replied, "Don't tell me you're Taesu, you've grown so much." The boy pointed to his sister and told him not to mind her. She always acted that way when she saw handsome men. The man who had received our protagonist at the wake pointed to his seat at the table and invited him to sit down and eat, saying he hadn't prepared much, but he could say if it wasn't enough. Our protagonist replied that it was a feast, and that since he used to live abroad, he missed homemade Korean food. His friend leaned into him and said, "Auntie even sent the maid home early and prepared this all by herself because you were coming." The woman laughed and told him to stop, because he was making the guest uncomfortable. Jung-hwan watched the couple's happiness for a few moments before interrupting, saying he had something to tell them. The man asked if it was something important, and Jung-hwan replied that he would be surprised if he found out later. The next day, an article would be published. The man picked up his chopsticks, and our protagonist said he would know more the next day, but that he was working on a case. The man found it strange and asked, "What do you mean? You haven't even been assigned yet. How can there be a case?" Our protagonist replied that his status as a prosecutor had not yet been suspended or terminated, so he still had investigative authority. The man looked at him worriedly and said, "Still, where is there a case of a prosecutor without an assigned department conducting investigations on his own? Acting recklessly is not good for your future." Jung-hwan replied, "What if I, by chance, became the target of a crime? Then there's no problem in securing the evidence and solving the case myself." The man found it strange and asked what had happened in just one day since he had returned. Jung-hwan said, "You'll know everything tomorrow. But the reason I'm mentioning this, you said there would be people who don't want me to become a prosecutor, right?" The woman seemed surprised and asked her husband if it was true, and he replied, "It's true. Vice President Lee Jong-byum called me and said that, to observe you and report your every move. I'm not sure, but the chief secretary and his associates probably received similar instructions. Those who run businesses are involved with powerful people in the prosecutor's office. They will probably find out what you did and where you have been for the past 6 years, and use that as an excuse to question your workability." Our protagonist nodded and said, "I know. Their methods are always like this. Even when the president was alive, they published aggressive articles about the relationship between the president and me through some media outlets. When I became a prosecutor, they alleged suspicion of special treatment. The scoundrels even covered up the fact that I disappeared. If I come back and return to being a prosecutor, they will put not only me, but also the Daesung group in the spotlight. But for the past 6 years, the fact that I am a prosecutor of the Republic of Korea, I have not forgotten that for a single day." The next day came, and reporter Kim Sang called our protagonist, and upon understanding, excitedly said that this was too much even for Collude. Choi Juseon had turned himself in less than half a day after he had spoken to Jung-hwan. Our protagonist replied that he probably thought it would be advantageous. When Sang-gu asked why, Jung-hwan revealed that since they knew he had evidence, the strategy was to strike first. Sang-gu asked what kind of evidence it was, and our protagonist replied that it was the kind that not only incriminated him, but also his father. The rain fell over Korea when the reporter arrived at their meeting point. Our protagonist waved, signaling where he was, and he followed with a smile on his face, saying it had been a while, complimenting his good shape. Our protagonist pushed the camera's memory card to him, saying, "You couldn't feel that about a man? Here it is, the black box footage containing the crime scene. But you don't know anyone at the police station?" Sang replied that he had already asked, and there were no registered cases. Our protagonist thought for a few moments, and the reporter continued, "Those kids didn't say anything since they turned themselves in either. They just acknowledged John Hyemin's statement and don't mention specific details about how they committed the crime. So why did they turn themselves in?" Jung-hwan said that meant it was difficult to arrest them and asked what exactly they were up to. Why that man would be trying to keep his son safe at the police station. That's when Sang-gu's eyes widened, understanding the situation, and Jung-hwan confirmed, "That's right, the opponent knows how to use the law." Our protagonist stood up saying they should split up. Maybe the opponents were watching them. Sang-gu said he would contact him later and left the store, walking through the rain that was falling on the city. The reporter wasn't a fool and realized he was already being followed. It didn't look good. He turned a corner and waited for the hooded men to catch up. Sang-gu greeted them, welcoming them, and the men were silent for a few moments until they approached him, saying that since he had noticed them, it was better to get straight to the point. He should hand over the memory card he had previously received from Jung-hwan. Sang-gu feigned ignorance and said he didn't know what they were talking about. The men didn't seem patient and pulled out a knife, saying they would help him remember. Sang-gu laughed, asking if they were really going to threaten a reporter with a knife. The man got into a fighting stance and declared, "Stop acting so relaxed. Today is your death anniversary, and it's still raining. Perfect weather to die, isn't it?" He advanced with the blade pointed at Sang-gu, who quickly moved, dodging and delivering a direct punch to the man. Sang-gu's fist let out steam, with veins bulging from the force he had put into it, as he laughed, saying it was the perfect time to get a beating. The other one screamed and advanced on him to strike him with a knife, but Sang-gu quickly applied a blow, spinning him in the air and delivering a direct punch to the man's chin. He fell to the ground, and Sang-gu stomped on him, while the man gritted his teeth and said he was no ordinary reporter. Before he could get an answer, the man felt Sang-gu's boot sink into his face, while the big guy laughed, telling him to shut up or he would end up dying for real. Sang-gu ordered the man to wake up his partner, who had fainted, and follow him. When they asked where, the reporter smiled, saying that they had committed sins and now they had to be punished. The man was confused, and Sang-gu explained that the punishment would vary according to how he wrote the article, so they should think carefully before answering. The questions were simple: who was their boss, and what they had done wrong before. The man screamed, feeling Sang-gu's boot tighten on his face again, and finally gave in. Sometime later, the two stood up after they finished talking, but Sang-gu stopped them, saying they had to go to the police station together. He also warned that his friend could run 100 meters in 12 seconds. If they ran away, one of them would die, while the other would be placed on the police's wanted list. They followed Sang-gu, asking if he was a detective or something, but Sang-gu ordered them to be silent. Soon he asked if they had more thugs at the cafeteria, and they confirmed they did. Sang-gu smiled, saying they should stop and get some coffee for the trip. The man looked at him extremely disconcerted, asking if he wasn't worried about the prosecutor who had stayed there, and Sang-gu laughed, saying that he had misunderstood. He seemed to confuse intelligence and power as separate things. The result was what we already expected. The thug who had met our protagonist had a face swollen from so much beating. Jung-hwan stopped in front of a location and asked if it was the indicated destination. When the man confirmed, he asked if he could leave. Jung-hwan replied that if he wanted to increase his punishment by running away, then so be it, but that he knew he would wait in silence. The man turned, feeling Jung-hwan's threatening gaze, and confirmed that he would wait. Jung-hwan entered the building, pushing the doors open with all his might, and found some men drinking tea. The redhead man looked at him and questioned who he was. Our protagonist asked if he was President Choi Sman, Choi Ju-seon's father, and stated that the police were on their way. The man was in shock, and Jung-hwan sat comfortably on the sofa in front of him, placed his cell phone on the table, and said he would give him 3 minutes to defend himself. Jung-hwan activated the timer on his cell phone, and Choi Sman recognized him as the prosecutor who had defeated his men. He asked if he wanted an apology, and our protagonist replied that he wasn't interested in something like that. What he wanted were the names and positions of those who had covered up the Jungjin school incident. That way, he would avoid the maximum sentence. Sman burst out laughing and said that he didn't know how to negotiate. Maybe he should even call him a fake instead of a prosecutor. He had some connections with the prosecutor's office, and even looking, he had never heard of a Lee Jung-hwan. Our protagonist warned that there were 2 minutes left, and Sman became angry, saying that he was going to die if he continued like this. Jung-hwan looked at him seriously and declared, "I thought you were a smart guy. Aggression, attempted murder, and even threats against a prosecutor. Did you think you could escape by doing these things? With just the evidence I have, you are finished. Your son, who turned himself in thinking you would save him, will certainly pay for his crimes as well." Sman lost control and went at him, screaming, but before he could hit him, our protagonist raised a chopstick, which stopped inches from his eye, saying there were 40 seconds left. When the man stopped, Jung-hwan placed the chopstick back on the table, while the man watched him, thinking about how he would be dead if that was a knife. He then asked who Jung-hwan was, and he replied with a threatening aura that he was a prosecutor of Korea. Jung-hwan announced that time was up and said that Sman had squandered his last chance for redemption. Sman asked if he thought the police would side with him, and Jung-hwan replied that he wouldn't have gone there if he weren't completely sure. If Sman was curious, he could look up his own name online. Sman grabbed his phone and searched his name. A series of articles appeared, and he stared at the screen in shock, thinking, "What? Was he really a prosecutor? The information I received clearly said there was no prosecutor named Lee Jung-hwan. Damn it. This bastard is going to investigate my case directly, and he'll investigate not only me, but my son too. What if he has the media on his side? I could lose everything I've built so far. This prosecutor is a typhoon. You can't face a typhoon with a sandcastle." Our protagonist got up to leave, and Sman followed him desperately, saying, "No, prosecutor. All the data on the people related to Jungjin School. No, besides that, I have much more to offer you. I'll take responsibility, admit my mistakes, and lend my strength to the prosecutor." To himself, he thought about all the effort he had made to reach that position, but it wasn't long before the police arrived. and Sman turned away, defeated. A police officer approached our protagonist, recognizing him and saying that he had heard he was close to Kim Sang-gi. He was team leader Seo Kichiol of the Regional Investigation Unit. Kichiol shook our protagonist's hand and said his senior had praised him, saying that if he worked with him, his performance was guaranteed, and he promised to cooperate with Jungwon's investigation from that moment on. Our protagonist felt uneasy. He sensed that this man seemed different from the corrupt police officers who usually showed up. Kichiol, in turn, watched him thinking, a man who became a prosecutor through his studies, directly apprehending and arresting those who attack with fish knives? I've never even seen that in a movie. Prosecutor Lee Jung-won. There's more than one suspicious thing. As his colleagues put Sman in handcuffs, he said he'd see him later and promised loyalty. When he turned to leave, our protagonist got straight to the point and asked if he wasn't going to investigate him. Kichiol stopped in surprise and turned around, asking what he meant. Jung-won then asked if he had misunderstood, and the two stared at each other in silence for a few seconds until Kichiol turned and said that, yes, they would investigate. Jung-hwan remained silent, looking at him, and then Kichiol threw his head back, laughing, saying he was just joking and that they only investigate those who commit crimes. Jung-hwan walked past him, smiling, saying that since he was the victim and the witness, he would voluntarily accompany them and give a statement. Kichiol was caught off guard and turned to him, saying that the evidence provided was already perfect. Besides the article written by Sang, if there were any needs, he would formally request them. They were a regional investigation team, after all. They didn't just investigate any way they wanted. Jung-hwan said they were trustworthy. The phone rang and the two separated. Kichiol went out into the rain, answering the call and asking someone if they had found what he had asked for. On the other end, the person replied, well, as you said, Senior, there's more than one suspicious thing. First, this man who became a prosecutor after passing the bar exam still has no career experience besides being a military legal officer, even after the bar exam was abolished. Do you know why? Upon getting in the car, Kichiol replied that he had heard he was out of the country, but the person responded that he had, in fact, disappeared. Kichiol was in shock with that information, and the person continued, saying that there was a missing persons report. Kichiol stopped and thought, I thought he wasn't a normal person just by looking at him, but he disappeared? On average, the number of missing adults per year is over 500. Of those, only about 10 return alive. He then asked his informant to explain in detail what had happened, and the person said, the complainant was director Jang Xiong-woo of the Daesung Group. At the time Lee Jung-won became a new prosecutor, there were suspicions that he was the illegitimate son of President Lee of the Daesung Group. Shortly after, his mother was killed in a hit-and-run accident, and prosecutor Lee Jung-won was also said to have been there. Kichiol sat in the car complaining, a case of this magnitude should have been all over the media, but there wasn't a single story. The culprit must have been caught, right? On the other end of the line, his informant checked the data at the police station, saying, unfortunately, there were no CCTV cameras near where the accident occurred. If we had investigated more deeply, we might have found the culprit's car number. But it seems the investigation didn't go any further. At that moment, prosecutor Lee Jung-won also went abroad, and that's how the case was swept under the rug. Kichiol shouted, asking who was in charge of the case to close an investigation like that. The next piece of information was unexpected. The informant warned him not to say those things out loud or he'd get in trouble, because the detective in charge at the time was now the chief of police. Kichiol gritted his teeth in anger, and the informant warned that this seemed to be a big deal. If they messed with it, it would end up affecting them. Kichiol didn't back down and asked him to send the documents. The informant replied that he would get in trouble. It wasn't even a regional unit investigation. Kichiol asked again, and the man realized there was sincerity in his voice. The informant replied, ever since I was at the police academy, getting a request from you, sir, was my life's goal. But this seems dangerous. The security clearance, too. Please be careful. I just sent the email. The two hung up. Kichiol had our protagonist's name in his mind and a question. How did Kim Sang-gu know someone like him? It wasn't long before Jung-hwan was greeted at the police station by reporters hungry for news, questioning how he had conducted his investigation and what he thought of the police's actions. Jung-hwan stopped in front of the microphones and said it wasn't a question he could answer. He had just happened to be caught up in the case and hadn't expected all that to happen. More questions arose, and he assured them that he had no choice but to go to the location personally. It was then that someone, smiling maliciously in the background, raised his voice and asked, I heard that prosecutor Lee Jung-won is not yet affiliated with the prosecutor's office. Our protagonist, who was already prepared for these questions, replied that yes, he had been out of the country until recently, but that fortunately the prosecutor's office had preserved his status during this time. The man came to the front saying that since he had been away for so long, he had lived as a civilian while he could have become a senior prosecutor, and now he was back with no experience. He might have more knowledge than a common civilian, but the man doubted he was on the same level as an active prosecutor. Jung-hwan smiled, saying that yes, he would still have to pass the retraining exam. The man smiled back, saying that Jung Hwan sounded like he wanted to go back to the prosecutor's office and that he was currently with the Ministry of Justice. Our protagonist confirmed, saying he would return as soon as possible. However, it wasn't something he could judge or choose himself. He had to wait for and accept the decision of the Ministry of Justice. The man frowned in anger, saying, "I understand perfectly what you mean. I also have another question. In the end, didn't all this start with the Jongjin High School case? Currently, the main suspect has admitted to part of the victim's statement and turned himself in. It's suspected that sex-related crimes were also involved. Maybe that's why the entire nation is currently outraged upon hearing the news. This is the biggest problem since the relevant law was amended in 2012. If the accused student's criminal acts are recognized, what kind of punishment will they receive? Since you're a prosecutor, you must know this as basic knowledge, right?" In his mind, the man was thinking, "I wonder if you, who have been abroad for a long time, can remember the habitual offender charge, which was established in 2010? Our protagonist, who was not only physically strong, replied calmly, "Article 297 of the Penal Code. A person who rapes another by violence or intimidation shall be punished with imprisonment and labor for at least 3 years. However, due to Article 305, established in 2010 regarding habitual offenders, the prescribed sentence can be increased by up to half. The accused student Choi Ju-seon and his 3 accomplices may receive the maximum legal penalty depending on the nature of the crime." The man gritted his teeth in irritation as Jung Hwan walked toward him, saying, "Not only do you know Article 297 of the Penal Code, but you also know the habitual offender charge established in 2010. It seems that you, reporter Park Jong-pil, have studied law quite diligently?" The reporter was in shock and asked how he knew his name. It was then that our protagonist asked if he knew Article 308 of the Penal Code. Jong-pil didn't get it at first, but with a look of astonishment, he heard our protagonist say it was about the crime of defamation of the deceased. The other reporters commented among themselves that it seemed they had known each other for a long time, and our protagonist walked past him saying quietly, "Starting with the article about President Lee Jong-byom's illegitimate son, even after my mother passed away, you tirelessly published malicious articles about me and my mother. From now on, the dirty suspicions that will follow you are just the beginning. Very slowly, I will make you feel the despair that my mother and I felt." He patted the reporter on the shoulders and then walked away with his hands in his pockets, saying, "Those who commit crimes are punished, and innocent people regain the happiness they should have. That is justice." Jong-pil dialed a number and called his boss in a panic. The man on the other end reprimanded him for calling. The reporter said there was a problem. Jung Hwan knew who he was. The man replied by asking what the problem was. Had he made a request that was too difficult? He had already paid more than enough for just a few words, and the reporter had failed anyway. Jong-pil tried to apologize, but the boss just ordered him to shut up. Jong-pil asked what he meant by that, and the boss replied that the moment he opened his mouth, his and his family's lives would be over. He had proof of everything wrong he had buried in recent years, in addition to the money he had received. So he should know what that meant. They shouldn't meet again. Jong-pil fell to his knees and clenched his fist around the phone. He had done all that to survive, and he couldn't end up like that. On a starry night, inside a luxurious building, the television was broadcasting the news, while the reporter's voice echoed saying, "Regarding prosecutor Lee Jung-won, who recently became a hot topic, the Ministry of Justice announced that he belongs to our Ministry of Justice and will be appointed as a probationary prosecutor to fill the gap left by his absence. Probationary prosecutors are new junior prosecutors who receive training from supervising prosecutors for 1 year." Jong Bom, who was sitting next to Secretary Kim, asked him about the results of his research. Kim began his report. Lee Jung-won, who wandered through Europe, took the admission exam for the Légion étrangère, known as the French Foreign Legion, after completing about a year of preparation 6 years ago. As his trail went cold from that point, it seems he passed successfully. Jong Bom turned and asked if he had passed, and Kim replied, "Well, due to the nature of the Foreign Legion, they don't provide information about their members, but seeing how he was kidnapped during the Jongjin High incident and escaped with his own hands, the inference seems correct." Jong Byum said that was ridiculous. Why would someone from the Special Forces want to become a prosecutor again? He said that was enough for now, and asked Kim to continue with the reports regularly. Kim bowed, saying he would take care of everything, and left. Jong Byum stood up and watched the city lights, thinking, Lee Jung-won, he has attracted a lot of public attention, but this method will ultimately be his downfall. I need to cut the roots so he can't cause any more trouble. I need to put more pressure on the prosecutor's office. Meanwhile, a train cut through the city, carrying civilians through the night. Soon people noticed that Jung-won was with them and recognized him as the man from the news. Girls commented among themselves, while our protagonist remained focused on his cell phone, wondering if attracting media attention had been more problematic than beneficial. He received a call from Kim Sang-gu, who started the call by saying he had seen the news. and asking why they had made him a probationary prosecutor. He replied that it was expected, but that without Sanggu's help it would have been impossible. The reporter laughed, feeling flattered by a compliment from Kalud, and Jung Hwan asked why he had sent so many reporters. The exposure was so great that he might have to buy a car. Sanggu replied that that was Korea. Even if the bait was as small as an anchovy, reporters would come like hungry piranhas. He had only sent a few, the gentlest and most discreet, but someone had leaked it. Jung Hwan laughed, saying that one of the big ones had shown up. Sanggu asked who, and our protagonist replied that it had been reporter Park Jung-pil of the Daein Daily. Sanggu recognized him and called him a bastard, while our protagonist said that it seemed there was someone behind him, in addition to seeming pleased to have him back. Sanggu asked if he should investigate, and Jung Hwan asked if there wasn't some kind of rule about respecting veterans, but Sanggu just asked if he was the type to care about those things. He was Rhino. He might not be as good as him, but he had enough confidence to move forward. Jung Hwan recognized that name and commented on the nostalgia. Our protagonist asked how everyone was doing, and Sanggu turned, saying they were doing so well that every time Jung Hwan was mentioned, they cursed him as if he were a traitor. Jung Hwan laughed, saying he expected that, since his ears had been burning lately. Sanggu said that he could say if he needed any help, he would see that case through to the end, and Jung Hwan assured him that he could get in touch at any time if he had any information. The two hung up, and Jung Hwan finally got off at his station. He continued walking through the place as he realized he was being watched. The man in the cap and black clothes followed him as he turned a corner, and when he turned behind him, he found nothing. The man was in shock, looking from side to side, looking for our protagonist, who appeared on the other side, asking if he wasn't being too obvious in his surveillance. He knew he had been followed since before the train, so who was that man? Jung Hwan reached out to remove the mask with a skillful movement, and the man quickly slapped his hand away. Jung Hwan asked if he was ashamed, and the man said he had gotten confused. It was better to go their separate ways. Jung Hwan advanced toward him, saying that if he wanted to pretend, he should have been more careful. The man dodged, throwing a punch, saying that he was just a white-collar worker who didn't know what the world was like, but he couldn't have been more wrong about our protagonist. Jung Hwan dodged the punch and changed his posture, moving. The man realized that he had dodged and saw him jump, planting a kick that threw him backward. The man had to brace himself on the ground to avoid rolling further, and Jung Hwan approached, saying that he looked like a professional. The mysterious man looked at him, wondering if Jung Hwan was not just a nerd who only studied. They had told him to watch a normal prosecutor, but he was different from the information he had received. Jung Hwan commented, laughing at the panicked expression in his eyes, and the man jumped up, knowing he had to get out of there. He advanced for a straight punch to Jung Hwan's face, who quickly dodged, responding with a direct punch to his chin. The man rolled, falling to the ground, and Jung Hwan stopped on top of him, with his shadow over his face, saying, "Daesung Group, Secretary to Vice President Lee Jong-byum, right? It seems the information you received was wrong. Even so, for a professional to be caught so easily. If you go back, you'll fall out of favor with the Daesung Group, and eventually your life will be in danger too, won't it?" The man's eyes widened, and he asked what he wanted. It was then that Jung Hwan proposed. He could be a double agent. Jung Hwan would pay double the commission that Daesung was paying. His conditions were simple. He would only continue to monitor Jung Hwan and report exactly what he saw. The secretary opened his arms and said that, in that business, accepting a counter commission was against professional ethics. Jung Hwan replied, "Stop with that nonsense. You're doing this for money, aren't you? If not, is it because you think the Daesung Group is too strong an opponent?" The secretary turned and sat down, saying, "Do I look like someone who would get involved in such dirty business? Most of the work in this field depends on instinct, you know? But my intuition tells me not to get involved anymore. I'm leaving." Our protagonist offered 50 million won in cash per month. The man said that seemed difficult with a prosecutor's salary, and Jung Hwan stated that he would also get 100 million as an advance payment. But it didn't matter much if he refused. After all, catching suspects of criminal activity was his job. The man stood up, saying that what he hated most was being manipulated by others, but there was no way out. Then he turned, asking what he should report. And our protagonist replied that for today, he should say that nothing happened. The next day, Jung Hwan walked through the crowd thinking, going to work carrying a briefcase. Does this look a little strange? Still, they're not getting tired. Assigning different surveillance since the morning again. They're not even trying to hide their presence. As he continued trying to evade those who were following him, a woman spotted him and followed him into an alley. When she turned the corner going after him, our protagonist grabbed her hand and pinned it behind her back, asking what she was. The girl screamed, and he realized she was wearing a school uniform. Immediately, already foreseeing the kind of trouble he was getting into, he let her go, apologizing and saying that he had been scared because he was being followed. The brown-haired girl turned, saying that it was okay and apologizing for hesitating and following him while trying to talk to him. That's when he recognized her. It was Jeon Hyeman, the girl he had avenged. She bowed before him and thanked him, saying that she had followed him to thank him. Tears began to stream down Hyemin's face as she repeated that she thought it was all over. Not even her friends, teachers, or parents believed her. She covered her mouth, crying even more, and thanking him for clearing up the injustice that had happened to her. She was truly deeply grateful. Our protagonist asked her to live confidently from now on, with brightness and happiness. That was the greatest revenge against them, and he would do everything so that no one else would suffer the injustices she suffered. Hyemin continued with tears streaming down her face. He then guided her out of the alley, saying that he was grateful because thanks to her, he could work even harder. Inside the Ministry of Justice building, our protagonist walked through the hall, hearing the comments that surrounded him. Is that guy Lee Jung-hwan? I have to work in the same office as a guy like that. He's disgusting, on par with someone who overstepped the district prosecutor's limit through media manipulation. Just a prosecutor? Acting without any sense. Ugh. Jung-hwan didn't expect to be particularly welcome, but they were making their dislike very obvious. He went to a room with a sign that read, Prosecutor Lee Soo-hyun. After a few knocks, he entered and introduced himself. The woman inside smiled at him, saying that he must be the new prosecutor, and also saying that he was more handsome than on television. The woman with long brown hair with a smile in front of him was Lee Soo-hyun, 27 years old. Jung-hwan observed her, thinking, currently, the youngest prosecutor in the Central District Prosecutor's office. Soo-hyun, in turn, extended her hand to him, thinking, not only did he pass the bar exam at 23, but he was also the official speaker at the training institute. The two greeted each other as she said, I really wanted to meet you, senior. You were quite famous among the freshmen, so it feels like I'm meeting a celebrity. Our protagonist asked her to just treat him like a normal probationary prosecutor, and she handed him a folder saying, shall we end the small talk here and get straight to the point? Here's the Jungin High case file related to you, prosecutor. As expected, it was a setup, wasn't it? I could tell just by looking at the perpetrator's statements. Jung-hwan asked if she believed their statements, and she replied, well, I trust my judgment more than the statements. You said you were kidnapped by the perpetrators, but in fact, to go to an isolated place, you allowed yourself to be kidnapped, didn't you? And how did Chief Seo Gichil of the Serious Crimes Unit call you to the bar? Since you just returned from abroad, he probably called through a third person. Seeing how the reporters also ran to the scene, that third person was probably a journalist. Like it or not, we are partners now. At least while we're together, I can't accept this result-oriented method of yours. Jung-hwan pulled the folder from her hand forcefully and said, I am in charge of this case, and if I really only cared about results, I would have solved it much faster. Soo-hyun was surprised and said, what you just said, you're admitting it was a setup, right? Didn't you think that if that fact is revealed and the criminals are released, it could make things difficult for the victims? Our protagonist waved the folder at her side, saying, before that, please consider the fact that it was the prosecutors and police who didn't investigate properly from the beginning. Now, can I go and finish my case? Soo-hyun handed him a few more folders and said that, in any case, the Jung-jin High case had to be concluded that same week and announced to the media. Besides that, a new case had been assigned to him. Jung-hwan carefully looked at the folder as she explained, the Club Coca case file. I'm sure you know this case, prosecutor. It was quite controversial. It was a big case where even suspicions of collusion between the club and prosecutors' police arose, and they are assigning such a case to a probationary prosecutor. Jung-hwan looked suspicious. Apparently, Lee Jong-byum wanted to control even the cases that were being assigned. Without a choice, he said he understood and would take it on. The prosecutor looked surprised and asked if he was really going to take that case, to which Jung-hwan replied, why not? As a partner in the same office, I'm trying to take full responsibility for the case entrusted to me. Soo-hyun commented that the case had been given knowing that it was difficult to deal with, and our protagonist asked if she was worried about him. She replied that she wasn't. They just needed to consult the investigators. Jung-hwan, with a serious and determined look, finished by saying, you can leave if you want. I don't trust you yet either, prosecutor. His words made her sigh deeply. Even though he was only a junior, she was still his designated supervisor, and she constantly wondered if he wasn't overstepping. But she couldn't deny it. She had been instructed not to cause unnecessary trouble. Turning toward the table, he tidied up some documents as she said, the section chief and the investigator will arrive soon. There's going to be a meeting about this case, so please familiarize yourself with it. Jung-hwan nodded promptly. Shortly after, the door opened with a click. Soo-hyun stepped forward, looking down the corridor. It seems they've arrived. The protagonist simply remained silent. From the other side, two figures entered, waving and greeting. Welcome, Section Chief, Investigator Kang, Suyan announced. Junghwan shook hands with the man, who introduced himself with a cordial smile. You must be Prosecutor Lee Junghwan. It's a pleasure to meet you. Beside him, the woman gave a polite bow. I'm Investigator Kang Yuna. Right after, the atmosphere in the room changed as the Coca Club case file was placed on the table. Murmurs rose among the investigators. We've been assigned this case? One of them grumbled, remembering that even Prosecutor Kim Yoon-seong, the district prosecutor's ace, had failed to gather evidence or witnesses and was subsequently dismissed. I thought this had been buried a long time ago. Why are they bringing it back now? Kang Yuna answered in a cold tone. Want to know why? Because it's a case where there's nothing left to find. They're going to use it as a guillotine to bring down someone who's already lost favor with their superiors. Do you really intend to investigate this? Soo-yeon interrupted her firmly, her gaze severe. Investigator Kang. Silence took over for a few seconds until Soo-yeon concluded. Let's stop the idle chatter and prepare for the meeting. Embarrassed, Kang Yuna lowered her head and quickly apologized. Yes, sorry. The meeting began with Junghwan summarizing the facts at the table. It had all started in February, when a 22-year-old woman was brutally assaulted by the Coca Club's security guards. To the investigators, this was not just another filed case but a trap disguised as a prosecution. The victim stated that the abuse, often facilitated by drugs, was recurrent at the location. When she exposed the facts to the media, it triggered a joint investigation between the police and the prosecution. One of the investigators crossed his arms and commented seriously, all the cases were filed away due to lack of evidence. But a month later, another victim emerged. It was at that moment that Junghwan understood why the media was pressing again, demanding a new investigation. He lifted the dossier, reflecting in silence. Even if the setting changes, the nature of those who live outside the law never transforms. In the end, it always comes down to money. In everyone's mind, the same image formed. Politicians, businessmen, and criminals surrounded by scattered bills, luxury, and bought silence. Junghwan faced the others and spoke firmly. They must have been fully prepared to protect the club, which is the center of all this money. Prosecutor Kim Yoon-seong, who investigated before, probably focused only on the Coca Club, but tension soon grew between them. But the targets we should be investigating aren't the clubs, one of the investigators retorted. Kang Yuna completed, outraged. Are you saying we should exclude the club, even though that's where the incident happened? We don't even have a warrant. Soo-yeon crossed her arms, keeping calm amidst the agitation, and asked what he was trying to say, since without the club, they wouldn't get a warrant. At that moment, Junghwan lifted a document. Here's the witness list. These are the VIPs who reserved rooms and tables at the club on the day of the incident. He tossed the papers onto the table, looking directly at the section chief. We need to find the common denominator among these people. Chief, you have some contacts in the police, don't you? The man cleared his throat, a bit uncomfortable, but confirmed, yes. Well, I've been in this job for a few years. But aren't these people on the list just witnesses with no direct connection to the case? Junghwan replied that was what they needed to determine, whether there was a connection or not. Then he added, his gaze penetrating, check if there are any recent lawsuits against these people. If they're company executives, check if there are records of complaints. You can do that without needing a warrant, can't you? Soo-yeon nodded. Junghwan watched the investigators quickly stand up, stating they would proceed as agreed. The room fell silent for a few moments until Soo-yeon took advantage of the other's absence to address him. Since we're alone, I want to ask you a question. Why are you focusing on the VIP list and not the club itself? Junghwan stood firm, looking out the window before answering. The most important thing, when facing an enemy, is to attack where he least expects it. She looked at him seriously. In other words, you're saying the club's VIPs might be involved? He nodded, certain this was the deduction expected from one of the best students at the Judicial Research and Training Institute. Are you thinking that if a VIP already has problems in their daily life, it's natural they'll cause the same problems inside the club? The protagonist calmly explained. Conversely, after doing this at the club, it might have become easier for them to repeat it outside. Soo-yeon's eyes widened when he suddenly turned and concluded, then, let's go now. The illuminated sign of the Coca Club shimmered. Soo-yeon, observing the place suspiciously, asked, you wanted to come here? Junghwan replied firmly, yes, after all, it's still the crime scene. She looked at him curiously. Are you going to do an undercover investigation when your face is already so well known? But he retorted calmly, it's dark inside. No one will notice. Let's go in. As they walked through the heavy doors, the environment engulfed them in an explosion of purple lights, deafening music, and constantly dancing bodies. Junghwan maintained a cold expression, sweeping the room with his eyes while Soo-yeon followed beside him, trying to blend in. The protagonist approached one of the security guards and stated he had a reservation with Director Joe. The man stared at him, recognized who he was, and then introduced himself. I am Director Joe. The timing couldn't be better. Right after. Upon seeing Soo-yeon, he commented casually, wow, your girlfriend is incredibly beautiful, isn't she? Soo-yeon snapped back impatiently. Stop with the unnecessary talk. Where is the room? They were guided to the best VIP room, an environment lit by purple tones. Sitting comfortably, Director Joe asked, "So, what do you think of the room?" The protagonist stated it was spacious and pleasant, then stepped forward and ordered, "Bring us the Columbia set." The director looked confused for a moment, but soon nodded. "Huh? I see, sir." Soo-yeon narrowed her eyes, suspicious. "What set is that? It's not going to cost 10 million won, is it? And you know that's very expensive, right?" Young-hwan, unfazed, replied naturally, "It's fine. I have a lot of money." She looked at him surprised, trying to understand the situation. "I thought you were just coming to warn the club owner that he's under investigation. Wasn't that it?" Young-hwan leaned in, his gaze sharp. "There are 7 front managers and the real owner remains separate. In this situation, how could we find out who is truly behind it? And if you say you're a prosecutor, they wouldn't even agree to meet." Faced with the answer, Soo-yeon remained silent, visibly displeased. Meanwhile, in another room, Director Joe commented on the new client. "A man who brings a girl and orders a 50 million won bottle. Don't you think he'd be a good person to recommend for a meeting?" Another man, watching through the cameras, added, "He has the expression of someone who tasted money early. And as you said, he seems like the type who never got his hands dirty." Then he looked seriously and stated, "Great, bring only the man, not the woman." Back in the VIP room, the director called out in a hurry, Sir! With a nervous smile, he began to babble. "I know a guy who has a lot of connections and runs a big business. If you want, you can meet him right now." Young-hwan cut him off dryly. "I'm fine. Just bring the drink." The man looked confused, but Young-hwan stared at him with a cold smile. "Why? Do you think I have money and want to invest here and there? I live surrounded by people like that, you know? If he's so desperate, tell him to come personally." With no way out, the director nervously called and delivered the message. The silence was interrupted by the sound of heavy footsteps approaching. A man entered the room and commented, "As expected, the real ones are different." If he had accepted the offer immediately, it would have been too suspicious. Then he handed over a card. "This is the club owner, Baek Sang-tae." The card confirmed his identity, CEO of Gold Moon Capital. The protagonist's gaze narrowed as he thought, Gold Moon Capital? That's a big target. Calmly, he also placed his card on the table. "Nothing comes without cost." Baek Sang-tae's expression changed immediately. "What? Another prosecutor? Are you just pretending to act because of media pressure?" Recognizing the face, he gritted his teeth. I remember where I'd seen you before." "You're the guy who appeared in the news." Beside him, Director Joe completed, "It was about the Jung-jin case, wasn't it?" The atmosphere grew heavy as Baek Sang-tae stood up, his voice charged with arrogance. "If you want to negotiate with me, then the chief prosecutor should come. How dare you send a rookie trying to extort me?" "Insolent!" He lifted his cell phone, showing the screen with images. "I took pictures of all of you, so don't you dare mess with me. Tell your boss to come personally." But before he could react, the device was snatched from his hands. "Oh, it's a good photo, isn't it?" the protagonist said with irony. The club owner was speechless, but soon exploded in fury. "You insolent bastard! Give that back right now!" The environment exploded in tension as the confrontation reached its climax. The impact of the blow echoed through the air, violently throwing the opponent's body. "Even if you are a prosecutor, you are still a client." The words came out laden with contempt, as if the position of authority held no value inside. But regaining control of the situation with a firm push, the protagonist asserted, "Your service is absolutely terrible, isn't it?" The text is a dramatic narrative excerpt, likely from a script or a novel. Baek Sang-tae clutched his chest, trying to catch his breath, and asked if this was really going to turn into a big problem. The protagonist, throwing his cell phone into the trash with an authoritative air, retorted, "What's the problem? Who told you to attack a prosecutor so carelessly?" Sang-tae was trembling, grinding his teeth. "You're just one prosecutor, but you're so arrogant just because you got a little media attention. I've been in this business for years. Do you really think I don't know prosecutors above you?" Young-hwan poured his drink into the bucket where the phone was and asked coldly if he wasn't tired of the same old speech. "I only came here today to have a drink and celebrate the reopening of this case. And it was you who provoked a client like me and even resorted to assault." The man, still shaking, began to realize he had gotten everything wrong. Stammering, he apologized and said he could enjoy the night however he wanted. But when the protagonist put his hand in his pockets, the stern, penetrating look made Sang-tae shudder. "Where are you going? Since we've met, how about a little chat? Somewhere without cameras." In a more secluded location, the two sat facing each other. The protagonist took the opportunity to formally introduce himself. Crossing his arms, he said, "I am Prosecutor Lee Jung-hwan, who is reinvestigating the Coca Club case. Please tell me what happened at the club and who is involved." Baek Sang-tae put on a smile, as if about to say something amusing, and repeated in a provocative tone, "Prosecutor Lee Jung-hwan, what is your real identity? I heard you just wrapped up the Jung-jin case a little while ago. So you came here to warn us that we'll be next?" The protagonist extended his business card and, with a glacial look, stated, "As the prosecutor in charge of the case, I'm here to give you a tip. You better tell me what happened at the club and who is involved. While I still treat you as an honest citizen. Sang-tai let out a scornful laugh, remembering the previous prosecutor, the one before you caused the biggest scandal, and still ended up defeated all alone. It looks like you also want to be exiled to some remote countryside and buried without anyone knowing, huh? They stared at each other, neither showing fear, and the conversation continued in threatening tones. You'll regret it if you threaten a prosecutor, Jung-hwan said. Sang-tai retorted in kind. If you have something to say, get a warrant first. Don't waste the time of a person whose time is money. He stood up even more arrogantly. Instead of wasting time like this, go after the power bosses who cover up their filth. Turning to leave, he muttered, disbelieving the situation he had gotten himself into. That's all I need. If he ordered an expensive drink, he should have just had it and left. Soo-yeon turned to him, indignant. What was all that? In the end, we didn't get anything. But that wasn't what Jung-hwan thought. He looked through the window facing the club and explained. Just in time, I got a call from Investigator Kang before coming to the cafe. It's been 3 months since the doctor couple who ran Shining Plastic Surgery disappeared. From the circumstances, it seems they took out a large loan from a loan shark company called Gold Moon Capital and then vanished. The police closed the case before even finding their whereabouts. There's a high probability that this is not just a debt case, but murder. Silence took over the atmosphere until the protagonist pulled the card from his pocket and added, I found the president of Gold Moon Capital, which is the source of their money. That's why I decided to take on this case. Soo-yeon, still shaken, asked how he intended to find evidence linking everything to the club, since there was only circumstantial evidence so far. Jung-hwan picked up his cell phone, showing some records, and asked, Are you familiar with Shining Plastic Surgery? She nodded, surprised. He explained, It's a famous hospital even in Gangnam. There are several records of medical malpractice that made the news. Due to this, the vice directors and other doctors were investigated, but the director himself was not. It's almost certain that the doctors commented amongst themselves about these errors. Soo-yeon's eyes widened. Medical malpractice? But there were no records of lawsuits being filed, were there? Jung-hwan responded coldly. There are no records at Shining, but there are lawsuits filed and then canceled at other hospitals. His voice became more intense as he looked back at her. There is a high probability that this will expand into a murder case. Completely shocked, Soo-yeon retorted, A doctor committing murder? Isn't that too far-fetched? But Jung-hwan was direct. We'll only find out if we investigate how many patients each doctor treated. Of course, the number of patients alone is still only circumstantial evidence. If we don't have definitive proof or a witness, we won't be able to sustain anything. But I have a plan. He took a deep breath before concluding. This is definitely a murder case, involving ghost surgeries. Meanwhile, at the Coca Club, Baek Sang-tae was sitting and explaining everything to his director Joe, who was shocked. Could it be? He didn't smell something, did he? Joe tried to minimize the situation, but Sang-tae didn't let him off easy. That it can't be is the kind of thinking that gets people into trouble, you idiot. We need to wrap things up with President Wang right away. The director, nervous, risked an idea. So, what if we open a few more businesses? Sang-tae angrily countered, What did you say, you imbecile? Are you crazy? The man almost shrank but continued to smile obsequiously. Sang-tae interrupted him again, even harsher. He's investigating clubs. And you tell me to open more clubs? Shut everything down! Close all the businesses and focus the resources on the hospital. First, we get President Wang's money circulating. Then, we'll think about the rest. The memory of that punch to the stomach flashed in his mind. Sang-tae clenched his teeth, anger etched on his face. Lee Jung-hwan, I better keep my distance from the hospital guys for a while, before that prosecutor digs any deeper. That night, in his apartment, behind the curtains, the real work was happening. Inside his room, Jung-hwan was typing intently, just as I thought. There is a cause of death called malignant hyperthermia, common in medical malpractice cases. A complication during general inhalation anesthesia. He was cross-referencing data while reflecting on the patterns. If a patient dies during a ghost or rushed surgery, they record it as death from malignant hyperthermia. Everything covered up as a side effect of anesthesia. Suddenly, a notification flashed on the screen. It was a report. Installation of listening device complete. Shining Plastic Surgery, consultation room under the blue vase. The prosecutor ordered me to do this, but we cannot use it as evidence. Jung-hwan narrowed his eyes. Now, what we need is proof that Shining Plastic Surgery performs an absurd number of surgeries in a single day, he thought, as his fingers tapped the keyboard. Soon, a recruitment file appeared. Target, women between 20 and 25 years old. Preference, acting students. Hourly wage, 50,000 won. Role, become a client and participate in consultation tests. Note, not an illegal job, but details cannot be disclosed. Thus, he was ready for the next stage of the plan. A week later, on the door of room 910, the names were posted. Prosecutor Lee Soo-hyun, Prosecutor Lee Jung-won. Inside, the analyses began to be discussed. During the last week, Shining Plastic Surgery received a total of 127 surgery surgery reservations. Despite the tight schedule, they accommodated everyone. Jung-hwan explained, "It depends on the surgery, but there's a limit to how many a doctor can perform in a single day. Typically, 3 simple double eyelid procedures and 2 nose surgeries. However, the doctors at this hospital scheduled a minimum of 6 surgeries per day." The information had an immediate impact. Right after, another piece of data emerged. And today, at 2 in the afternoon, 2 patients have surgeries scheduled with the same doctor. Jung-hwan turned to his partner, who was asking, "How do you know that?" "It's not like you met them," Jung-hwan answered without hesitation. "All 127 people who made reservations are people I hired myself." One of the investigators crossed his arms, surprised. "Impressive. I didn't know you had hired all of them." Kang Yu-na added, "In any case, if 2 patients have surgeries scheduled with the same doctor at the same time, one of them must be receiving a substitute surgery from another doctor. That would be a legal problem, and it would give us room to act." Soo-yeon interrupted with a colder tone. "But right now, everything is still just circumstantial. What do you intend to do? We don't even have a warrant, so all we can do is invade the crime scene." Jung-hwan placed a document on the table and stated, "I have a plan for that." Soon after, he confidently added, "Everyone, wait calmly nearby." Outside, the facade of shining plastic surgery stood out. The tension escalated as a voice erupted amid the confrontation. "Get out of my way, you useless people!" In the lobby, our protagonist burst in desperately, yelling, "Where is my Soyeon?" He advanced, pointing and demanding answers. Nurses tried to restrain him, asking him not to make a scene there, but he screamed, "Get her out right now!" He retorted indignantly, "I'm Soyeon's husband." The husband says no and the doctor still performs the surgery? He ignored them and walked through the hall, calling out loudly, "Soyeon, where are you?" "Your husband is here," leaving the staff behind, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, he stopped, surprised to find an unexpected scene. 3 men appeared in front of him, blocking the way. One of them spoke in a firm tone. "Sir, it's a problem if you cause a scene like this. There are patients in surgery, so please stop." One of the men in a suit tried to control the situation. "I'll speak to the doctor immediately, so calm down. How about we go to the consultation room to talk?" But the fake husband, overcome by despair, replied without hesitation, "Wait, before I go, let me see my wife's face. I won't be able to stay calm in a consultation room without knowing how she is, will I?" The security guard was reluctant, but eventually gave in. "That might be a bit complicated, but we can do it." Jung-hwan's eyes shone with a mixture of surprise, and yet the security guard commented, "It seems you two have a deep love for each other. Follow me. I'll guide you." Soon they arrived at the door of the operating room. Jung-hwan rushed in and saw the doctors already positioned around the table. One of them turned, indignant. "How can a stranger just walk into the operating room? Get out of here immediately." The tension increased, but one of the security guards intervened. "He is the patient's husband, and he won't allow the surgery to happen. So we'll have to send the patient back." The doctor, displeased, replied, "All right." It seemed resolved, but the mood suddenly changed. Jung-hwan's gaze fixed on the doctor, and, in a quick move that even the security guard couldn't stop, he tore the mask from the doctor's face. "I found you." He immediately thought that this man was not on the official hospital website. The fake doctor screamed in pain as he was immobilized, while Jung-hwan ordered without hesitation, "Stop the surgery in the next room right now, and tell them not to touch anything until I give the order." The still tense security guards moved forward through the room, asking who he was. Jung-hwan, without hesitation, opened his hand, revealing his official ID. "Me? I'm this kind of person. And what are you going to do about it?" The metallic gleam of the badge echoed in the surprised eyes of those present, while the fake doctor writhed in pain in his grip. The shock was immediate. "Damn it, he's a prosecutor," they muttered in panic, unable to hide their fear at the revelation. Holding the imposter firmly, Jung-hwan maintained his cold gaze and stated loudly, "In 2015, there was a case in the United States where someone was punished for illegal intrusion related to a ghost surgery, to the level of assault or even murder. You won't be much different from that, will you?" Amid the stunned silence, his voice grew even harsher. "You are all under arrest." He made sure to remind the detainees of their rights, reinforcing that they could call a lawyer, but should remain silent until then. With his cell phone in hand, Jung-hwan gave the final order. "Section Chief, arrest every single one of them, down to the smallest fish. We're taking them straight to the prosecutor's office." In the prosecutor's office, the tension was palpable. A firm voice asked, "Who did you arrest?" The answer came without hesitation, including the director and vice director of Shining Plastic Surgery Clinic, plus 10 doctors and 15 nurses. Soo-yeon was reporting to the chief prosecutor's cabinet, who immediately stated that he had put them on the club case and didn't understand how they ended up at a random hospital. Yoon Myung-wood continued, "And what were you doing while Lee Jung-hwan was doing this?" The explanation was direct. They were caught in the act of performing a ghost surgery. We suspected collusion between the Coca Club and the police, so we conducted an independent investigation. Yoon's fist slammed hard on the table. The Jungjin case was the same thing. Is this how Lee Jung-won always acts? His expression twisted with fury. Does he not respect the hierarchy of the prosecutor's office or the police? Soo-yeon, completely composed, stated that this was a very complicated case, one that had already been tampered with and manipulated, difficult to bring to light and too exposed to be buried. Jung-hwan was walking down the hallway escorting the suspects, while Soo-yeon explained loudly, if Prosecutor Lee had only investigated following the procedures, like Prosecutor Yoon-sung, it would have been nearly impossible to find the connection between the hospital and the club. And the crimes that were happening so openly inside the hospital would never have come to light. In the office, the tone rose as Yoon Myung-wood explained what hierarchy meant. Lee Soo-yeon, is this a school? Do you think the positions and the authority that comes with them exist just for show? Or is it because I was your father's teacher that you feel too comfortable with me? Since they have already been arrested, if we handle this carelessly, it could backfire on us. If that happens, not only Prosecutor Lee Jung-won, but you and I could also be fired. She, however, did not back down and completed, "Don't worry, we have secured all the evidence and witnesses." Irritated, Yoon Myung-wood retorted, "You're full of yourself. For now, report the progress of the investigation as it happens. Until we have a concrete lead on the club case, the three of us will keep this secret." He ended the matter harshly, saying she could leave. Soo-yeon bowed, assenting to the request. As soon as she left the room, he muttered under his breath, staring fixedly at the door. Like father, like daughter. She's just like him. Inside the office in room 910, several prosecutors were spread among desks and piles of documents, as the murmur grew throughout the place. "Section Chief, have you seen anything like this before?" asked Kang Yu-na, receiving the reply. "No, it's the first time." She continued, "You heard the others in the hallway, didn't you? He just caused a big commotion without solving anything." Her colleague quickly reprimanded her. "Shh, the prosecutor might hear you." In the background, they were still worriedly whispering. It's not going to be a big problem, is it? What's he going to do now?" The tension focused on the hospital director, sitting with a nonchalant posture, who questioned, "What should we do with the hospital if they arrested all the doctors like this? Do you have any idea how many surgeries were scheduled for today?" Sitting across from him, Jung-hwan remained firm, his hand clenched on the table, answering directly, "Are you still so unconcerned about the surgeries scheduled for your patients? Listen, Director, someone was caught in the act of performing a ghost surgery at your hospital. Explanation for the audience, ghost surgery. A power of attorney is a document that authorizes someone to act on another person's behalf. In this case, it would be when one doctor performs the surgery in place of another, as if they were the official person in charge. But in medicine, this does not exist. The doctor who introduces himself to the patient is the one who must operate. If another person does it without consent, it can be considered fraud, an ethical breach, and even a crime." Jung-won watched the director, who was smiling cynically while denying any involvement. "A ghost surgery? I have no idea about that. And do you have proof that all these doctors were performing such surgeries?" the man retorted confidently, trying to turn the tables. However, Jung-won countered coldly. "We caught a doctor who wasn't even registered at the hospital trying to perform a surgery. Why would we need more proof?" The director, overcome with nervousness, raised his voice. "What? You illegally entered the operating room without a warrant." His attempt at justification sounded fragile. "Do you really think that warrant will be issued?" The tension escalated when an employee rushed over. "Prosecutor, the interrogation room is ready." With a slight nod, Jung-hwan calmly replied, "Great, I'll see you after I finish then." And without haste, he walked toward the next step of the investigation. In the interrogation room, the atmosphere was charged with tension. The detained man remained seated at the table, while Jung-hwan took his place on the other side. With a calculated gesture, he placed a cell phone on the table, immediately catching the suspect's attention. "What is that?" the man asked, suspicious. Jung-hwan replied coldly and objectively, "It's evidence." Pressing the screen, he started playing an audio recording. A voice echoed, "The 3 o'clock patient is for double eyelid surgery, right? Manager, wasn't this patient Mr. Young's responsibility? I had 3 reservations today." "Wow, you're making a lot of money, haha." The suspect's face turned to pure shock. "Oh, wait, how did you get that?" he stammered, sweating coldly. Jung-hwan's eyes shone with determination. "You can't fail to recognize your own voice." He remained impassive in the face of the man's despair. He then added firmly, "You didn't have time to erase the operating room recordings when we raided, did you? Thanks to that, besides this audio, we got countless other proofs." Our protagonist proceeded, "So be honest with me. Only then can I consider mitigating circumstances for you." Silence took over, and then the suspect leaned forward, stammering an attempt at justification. I was in the operating room, but I didn't touch the patient with a scalpel. The surgical team changed constantly, so I only came in as a temporary assistant." Jung-hwan immediately countered, If the team was constantly changing, it means this was not the first time a ghost surgery happened. The man lowered his shoulders, defeated. That is... The prosecutor leaned forward and said in a grave tone, "If you keep hiding, you'll be the only one to pay for everything. Even without your cooperation, we already have enough evidence to arrest all of you. But it's not the obvious surgeries I want to talk about." The suspect trembled and, overwhelmed by desperation, asked, "And so what do you want?" The answer came quickly, weighted with importance. "Coca Club!" Younghwan placed a Coca Club card in front of him, questioning firmly, "You were invited to organize ghost surgeries at Shining Plastic Surgery through the Coca Club, weren't you?" The man, in shock, swallowed hard and could not deny it. The prosecutor's words grew sharper as he described the strategy used against inexperienced doctors. The promise of gaining practice, receiving extra bonuses, and even securing investors to open their own clinics. A shadowy figure emerged in his speech. Baek Sang-tae, from Gold Moon Capital, someone with enough influence to attract ambitions. With a penetrating gaze, Younghwan pressed further, "What I need is a statement about the director of Shining Plastic Surgery. You've already had disagreements with the hospital. Are you going to take the blame for what the director did?" The doctor was trembling, and the internal narration revealed his dread. His career as a surgeon was already ruined, but now his freedom was also at risk. "Your life as a doctor is over, but what if I can reduce your sentence?" Younghwan insisted, while the suspect, perplexed, tried to understand how the prosecutor knew so many details, and our prosecutor continued, relentless. "There's a big difference between someone who confesses right away and another who insists on lying until the end, even if both committed the same crime." Then he got up, passing him, and said, "You are a free man until the arrest warrant is issued. Go eat something and come back later. I'll see you again." The weight of those words left the doctor in despair. He finally gave in. "You get about 20% of the surgery fee for a ghost operation. I had only received the offer before, but today was the first time I was actually going to do it." Dejected, without strength, and hunched over the table, he affirmed, "I'll tell you everything. I'll tell the truth, honestly." Younghwan left the interrogation room after the doctor's big confession and, upon opening the door, was surprised to find a man standing in front of him. "Hello?" "Deputy Chief," he greeted, maintaining a firm tone. The man staring at him was Woo Byung-jin, the Deputy Chief of the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office. "You worked hard. Did you get any results?" he questioned coldly. Younghwan replied with conviction, "We obtained confessions and testimonies. Soon we will proceed with the arrests." The Deputy Chief continued, "You are Lee Jung-hwan. I see you are passionate about what you do, that's good, but it's also a bit excessive." He proceeded without allowing a reply. "You arrested the hospital director without concrete evidence, didn't you? This should have only been a witness interrogation. So did you find any valid charges?" Woo Byung-jin leaned in, his expression severe, and fired, "If you don't find any charges, you, who caused all this chaos along with your superior, Prosecutor Lee Soo-yeon, will have to take responsibility. You made the prosecutor's office look like a joke." Young-hwan, maintaining his composure, faced him firmly and just said, "Deputy Chief." An enigmatic smile appeared on his lips, defiant. "Is this really such a serious matter that it required you to come all the way here personally? You've got guts. But investigations aren't done with just audacity and bravado. The seriousness of the law lies in following principles and procedures." The deputy chief reprimanded him. With authority, he ordered, "Send the hospital director back immediately and submit a statement of explanation by tomorrow." Young-hwan bowed slightly, assenting to the order. Despite his apparent submission, a slight smile appeared on his face as he thought, "I've already secured the necessary evidence." The scene then shifted to the illuminated facade of a building at night. Inside, Baek Sang-tae walked amidst restless thoughts. Damn it! Chairman Wang's deadline for the money is approaching, and now the prosecutor's office had to show up. With the hospital in this state, there's no way to get the amount. Suddenly, the office door burst open. The man was startled to see 3 figures enter, 2 towering bodyguards flanking an immaculately dressed elderly man wearing a traditional red vest and leaning on a cane. That was Chairman Wang. He appeared accompanied by his men, surprising the person in charge of the Coca Club. The sudden presence of the old boss made him immediately bow, showing respect and fear. Wang, with a firm expression and dominant posture, sat calmly in the armchair and directly questioned why the other man hadn't seated himself in front of him. The subordinate tried to justify his position, claiming that if he had been summoned, he would have personally gone to the chairman, displaying submission and subservience. However, Wang cut straight to the point, mentioning that he'd heard about problems at the hospital. He stated that the institution had even been shut down that same day, and that investigations were underway. The subordinate, panicking, mentally wondered how the old man knew everything so quickly. Nervous, he tried to evade the topic, forcing a smile while denying anything serious was happening. Wang remained impassive. Holding his cane, he commented that the media might be making a fuss, but they hadn't gotten any solid proof before. With a firm voice, he guaranteed that he would personally deal with the hospital situation situation soon, and the club as well. Baek Sung-tae tried to maintain his composure, but Wang, serene and ruthless, declared, "I don't care what you do at the club, but a simple flaw that interferes with my business. That's a problem." The air grew heavy when they asked him who the prosecutor in charge was. The image of our protagonist came to mind. His name is Jung-wan, a new prosecutor who recently gained media fame. Wang frowned. Even if he's new, a prosecutor is still a nuisance. It's best to cut the tail off quickly before things get ugly. Sang-tae's eyes widened, sweating coldly. "Huh? What does that mean?" he murmured, unable to hide his panic. But the old man simply leaned back in the chair and adjusted his hat, closing the matter. "It doesn't matter. It was just an old man's worry. Since I know the situation, I'll trust you, for now." Relieved, Sang-tae bowed deeply and thanked him. "Thank you very much for your trust, Chairman. I'll take your advice seriously and deal with this quickly, so you won't have to worry anymore." Wang walked slowly, leaning on his cane, and in an enigmatic tone he muttered, "Advice? Well, since I gave you some, I'll give you one more." His gaze narrowed into a cruel smile as he completed, "You talk too much." Suddenly, one of his thugs appeared from behind Baek Sang-tae, stifling his screams with a cloth over his mouth. The chairman continued, relentless. "No matter how I look at it, there's no excuse to keep you alive. You should have sorted out your own problems yourself." Pinned by the arms, Sang-tae struggled desperately but was easily restrained. The other bodyguard approached, revealing an axe in his hands. The cold gleam of the metal reflected the tension in the air. Sang-tae's eyes widened in pure terror, sweat streaming down his forehead. The brute raised the blade high, ready for the final blow. The last thing Sang-tae saw was the cutting glint descending toward him, before the screen was filled with the dark blur of blood spilled on the floor. The next day, police cars surrounded the entrance, and officers guided the investigators. "Okay, where's the scene?" one asked. The answer was direct, on the 5th floor. Inside, the office room was grim, filled with forensic experts photographing and analyzing every detail. A dark trail of blood stretched to the body, now covered by a blue sheet. Among those present, a burly man stood with his arms crossed in front of the covered body. "Sergeant Seo, you're here already?" someone commented, recognizing him. Immediately after, another officer approached and greeted him firmly. "Leader Jung, long time no see." The man replied, "I'm working hard, aren't I? How was the scene?" Then came the explanation. "In 20 years as a police officer, it's the first time I've seen anything like this. It must have been so brutal that they covered the body in a rush, without even preserving the crime scene." Leader Jung exchanged a serious look with a colleague and murmured, "It looks like we need to be prepared. If the homicide unit has come to take over this case, the severity is greater than it appears." Meanwhile, a younger agent, visibly nervous, apologized and began his scene analysis, concluding in thought, "Based on the state of the body, it doesn't seem to be the work of a single assailant." At that moment, a firm voice echoed behind them. "Good work." They all turned to see a man entering, displaying his badge. "I am Prosecutor Lee Jung-wan, from the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office." He walked over and asked how they were. Seo replied, "Prosecutor Lee? But we haven't even started the investigation. How is the prosecutor's office already involved?" Jung-hwan responded firmly, "He's directly linked to the case I am conducting. I need to confirm his identity." Seo hesitated but allowed, "It's not a pleasant sight. But if you want to see, go ahead." Jung-hwan approached, lifted the sheet, and revealed the body. His gaze hardened as he recognized Baek Sang-tae. Was I too late? He thought. The police officers exchanged glances, impressed by his coolness at the scene. One of them commented softly, "This prosecutor has a strong stomach. Not even veterans can handle this." Another added, "Even if he had many enemies, ending up like this is too cruel." Jung-hwan, however, maintained his composure. "I have a different opinion. Lend me a glove." The detective stared at him, surprised. Jung-hwan firmly adjusted the gloves, analyzing the body before him. "This is not a murder motivated by resentment. There are no signs of mutilation, which is typical in such crimes. Look at the wound. The blade is embedded exactly as it was inserted, with no twisting or attempts at removal." He leaned in slightly, paying attention to the details. "The only resistance came from the elasticity of the skin, but the skull was crushed only by the aggressor's brute force. In other words, we are dealing with a professional." The team leader frowned, considering the prosecutor's words. At least it wasn't a crime driven by emotion. If it were personal resentment, the body would have been torn apart. Jung-hwan continued, "Even with an axe, it's rare to find someone capable of splitting a skull with such cleanliness." He began to explain his view. The aggressor was probably a large man, over 100 kilos. The force required for this is not common. The leader crossed his arms and questioned gravely, "A planned crime, the physical build of the perpetrator already defined. Is there anything else you've managed to find?" The prosecutor answered without hesitation, "They may be leaving Korea quickly." One of the detectives, startled, retorted, "He's going overseas?" Jung-hwan removed his gloves and declared, "The motive for committing something so bold can only be this. He was already planning to flee immediately afterward. We cannot let someone who kills so brazenly escape." First Sergeant, mobilize your men to the Incheon ports. Stop any individual over 100 kilos for questioning. It's more likely he'll try to leave illegally, so focus on smuggling routes. Further away, the investigation team leader mentally grumbled. Damn it! This is our jurisdiction. Why are the prosecutor's office and the homicide unit taking over everything? The sergeant immediately picked up his phone and loudly gave orders with authority. Gather all available men now! Hurry! Younghwan watched in silence, knowing they had to act quickly. All of this needs to be exposed before Bayek's gang disappears without a trace. After hearing the news about him, he tried to imagine who could have killed Baek Sang-tae so ruthlessly and yet left the body and weapon behind, as if they had no fear of being arrested. He suspected that the bosses, exposed after the hospital raid, had decided to eliminate him to cover their tracks. But then the image of the shining hospital director came to mind as he reflected. The investigation of all the doctors has already been concluded. The only one left is the director. After all, he would have a direct link to the superiors. The scene shifted to the brightly lit parking lot at night. Cars lined up under the lampposts gave an air of normality, but silence concealed the tension in the air. The director appeared, saying goodbye to an employee with a forced smile. You worked hard. Keep doing the same today, the man responded respectfully. Yes, thank you. As he got into his car, the director managed a small smile, relieved that the day had passed quickly. His peace, however, was interrupted by a shadow approaching discreetly. A firm hand clamped over his mouth, stifling any attempt to scream. The director struggled, but only managed to let out a choked sound. The shadow then revealed itself in the dim light, and the face of Younghwan was recognized. In a low and relentless voice, he ordered, "If you want to live, just cooperate in silence." The director, panting and filled with panic, managed to stammer through the fingers suffocating him. Where to? Younghwan then leaned close to his ear and whispered coldly, "The Coca Club VIP room." The director's face panicked. He couldn't believe this was a prosecutor threatening a civilian, but Younghwan's intense gaze made it clear that at that moment, he wasn't acting as a prosecutor. He was off duty. And so the car left. Soon, we are taken to the Coca Club. Inside, a conversation began. "Director, you're off today? But who is this with you? Is he our club's new member?" They both moved further into the premises, while the director explained that people called this place the Antlion Trap, and asked if Younghwan knew why. "What are you trying to say?" "It wouldn't be wise to provoke me," Younghwan replied. The director smiled unsubtly and retorted, "I mean, once we enter, neither of us can leave whenever we want. So you should go back now." Younghwan interrupted him abruptly. "Stop talking nonsense and follow me." The director opened the door, and upon entering found a group of men. Some were slumped on the sofa, seemingly drunk, but in the center was Wang, with a terrifying smile inviting them in. He was already waiting, desperate. The director tried to justify himself, claiming he hadn't said anything. However, the chairman gave a sign for silence, forcing him to quickly cover his mouth. Junghwan looked at Wang and said, "The murder of President Baek Sang-tae in Sinsadong. That was your doing, wasn't it?" The chairman started laughing, saying, "It doesn't matter who did it." He then made a proposition. "Wouldn't you be interested in working for me? I'd pay you at least 10 times your current prosecutor salary. If you simply abandon your little sense of justice, you could easily show your talent. What do you say?" "Working for a great country." Younghwan smiled, saying, "Why don't you just turn yourself in? I'm too lazy to deal with foreign criminals." Wang started laughing hysterically, commenting that Younghwan was the best. Younghwan then said, "Just as I thought," he didn't listen. "There's no way to deal with guys like this just by using the law." At that moment, the door burst open. 2 burly security guards entered, and one of them pulled out an axe, causing the director to panic. "Should I eliminate him?" the security guard asked. Wang laughed. "You've been seeing too much blood lately." At the same time, the protagonist received a message informing him that they had found the culprit. The axe was raised behind him, but Younghwan didn't move, remaining there holding his phone while thinking, "You found the culprit? What about those guys? Well, we can go and see for ourselves." Then the force was brutal, and the cut left a red streak in the air, but the blade had slammed into the floor, leaving the bodyguard startled. "Where?" he asked, turning his head in all directions. Suddenly, Junghwan delivered a perfectly aimed knee strike to the bodyguard's neck. The chairman and the director were completely terrified. The instant he firmly stepped on the ground, he was met by an axe narrowly missing his neck, but he managed to dodge by quickly ducking. With every violent blow the security guard dealt, Junghwan narrowly escaped, dodging with impressive reflexes. In one of the lunges, he counterattacked with a devastating punch to the other bodyguard's stomach. The force was so great that the man, who weighed over 100 kilos, was thrown against the wall. Wang watched the scene, reflecting to himself that this was no ordinary prosecutor. Soon after, he approached and asked if Younghwan hadn't changed his mind. "If you open your mouth one more time, you might have to go to the hospital before you're even investigated," Junghwan responded firmly. "There's already plenty of evidence at the scene, so you are finished." Suddenly, Wang made a quick movement, using his cane as if it were a sharp sword. Younghwan realized the cut on his shirt too late. With a sinister and malicious smile, Wang said, "Do you think I've lived all this time without receiving threats? Evidence doesn't solve everything, Mr. Prosecutor. In this country, if you exploit loopholes in the law and push with money, anything is possible." Jung-hwan touched his shirt and noticed something strange. His head felt heavy, and his strength began to drain away. The blade of the cane was poisoned. Wang laughed loudly, showing his teeth while provoking, "You're holding up very well. This is an extremely potent poison that can kill an ordinary person in less than a minute with just a light scratch." Even weakened, Jung-hwan showed a contained smile, almost hidden by the shadows. "Right, I made a mistake in my reasoning. I can't expect common sense from guys who use any means necessary." He grabbed one of the liquor bottles on the table, immediately catching Wang's attention. The bottle was shattered in his hand, turning into an improvised weapon. "You're right, evidence isn't everything, especially when there are no living witnesses at the crime scene." Suddenly, a swift movement left Wang's eyes bulging. Jung-hwan finally felt his head clear and his senses slowly return. With a malicious grin, he stated, "You need to learn a lesson." Wang raised the sword and shouted, "I will make you pay 50 times over!" However, Jung-hwan landed a punch to his face, making his glasses fly off. The old man reacted with a sword strike, roaring with anger, "I'm going to kill you!" But Jung-hwan cut him off firmly. "If you open your mouth one more time, I told you you'd be going to the hospital." Jung-hwan dodged and delivered a strong punch to the ribs, leaving him breathless. Wang, almost like a zombie, stammered, "Why, aren't you falling?" Grabbing him by the collar, Jung-hwan spun him around before slamming him hard onto the floor. Then he violently threw him against the wall. Wang had no strength left. His head was on the ground, eyes closed, groaning in pain. Jung-hwan stared at him and declared firmly, "If I fall for a guy like you, I won't recover anything." The hospital director was huddled in the corner of the room, trembling and covering his face in despair. He choked up into sobs while Jung-hwan stood firm, staring at him. The prosecutor slowly approached and asked, "So, are you ready to tell the truth about these guys now?" With no way out, the man began to talk. "Those people, that old man and the thugs, are the main ones responsible for bringing drugs from China. And the one lying there is Andy Rogers, an American money launderer. His family is very wealthy." Jung-hwan maintained his serious gaze and stated, "I hope you remain this cooperative when you are before the prosecution." The director's eyes widened in shock. "What?" Before he could react, the door burst open and an armed group of police officers rushed into the room. The leader held up his badge and announced, "We are from the Regional Investigation Unit of the Seoul Metropolitan Agency. We request your cooperation." He then firmly ordered, "Arrest everyone who is down. Collect the drugs and weapons, leaving nothing behind." The police quickly surrounded the scene. When the leader noticed Jung-hwan was injured, he ran over to him. "Prosecutor, are you all right? You have a chest wound. I'll call an ambulance immediately." But Jung-hwan raised his hand and replied, "No. Did Chief Seo contact you to come?" The man confirmed, "Yes, he contacted us and ordered us to come immediately." Jung-hwan nodded and thanked him seriously. "Excellent. First, arrest everyone since they were caught in the act. Send them to the prosecutor's office tomorrow." Then, he pointed to the man still trembling in the corner and added, "And don't forget the hospital director." The tension began to dissipate as the officers led the detainees away. Sometime later, the scene changed to the city streets illuminated at night. A taxi sped through traffic. Inside, the silhouette of a man leaning against the seat gave instructions in a low voice. "Driver, take me to Soon University Hospital." The driver nodded, trying to stay calm, and politely asked, "Sure, but please put on your seatbelt before we leave." However, when he looked in the rearview mirror, his eyes widened in shock. The passenger was covered in sweat, his hand pressed firmly against his bloody chest. It was Jung-hwan, breathing with difficulty. With a faint voice, he murmured, "I apologize, but I don't have much time to endure. Could you drive a little faster?" Inside the hospital, a woman in a medical uniform was leaning against the wall, exhausted. Still, she couldn't get one person out of her head. As handsome as he was, he seemed dangerous. The image of Jung-hwan came like a vivid dream, but she quickly corrected herself. "Jang Ha-nyul! You don't even know what kind of person he is yet." Suddenly, a strange noise made her turn around. Her eyes widened as she saw Jung-hwan enter, injured and nearly staggering. She immediately ran to him. "Prosecutor, what happened to you? How?" "First, call the on-call doctor." But Jung-hwan firmly held her hand and, gritting his teeth, asked where the treatment room was. Inside the room, Jung-hwan removed his shirt, revealing the extent of the cuts. "What is all this?" Jang Ha-nyul asked. He replied, "Sorry, but could you prepare some treatment materials first?" She insisted on knowing what had happened, but he only told part of the truth. "I only cut myself with a broken glass bottle." Jang Ha-nyul examined the wounds and retorted, Are you kidding me? I'm a doctor at this hospital. These cuts are from a weapon. Jung-hwan reminded her that she was only a third-year resident, and then stated, your supervising professor is Lee Do-soo, the director of the Emergency Trauma Center. She was surprised and asked how he knew that, but Jung-hwan replied firmly, I only came to this hospital for that reason. Director Lee Do-soo is my friend. Jang Han-yul remained serious. If the director was his friend, the age difference was significant, and that increased her curiosity even more. Who is this man, after all? She thought. She sat down in front of him, but soon realized that the prosecutor was trying to treat himself. If you were going to do everything yourself, why didn't you go to a nearby pharmacy? She questioned. Jung-hwan replied without stopping what he was doing. I can even handle the wounds myself, but I can't give myself the injections. She was surprised. What? Injections? What do you mean by that? Jung-hwan gave a slight smile, but the explanation was harsh. He had been poisoned and wasn't sure how long he would last. Suddenly, his body weakened, and he bent towards her, leaning on her shoulder. With heavy breathing, he spoke quietly. I have a favor to ask. Call Professor Lee Do-soo. And don't tell anyone else. Quickly, Jang Han-yul ran to find help. The director was in the middle of a surgery, but she soon found him in the corridor. Professor, I am Jang Han-yul, third-year intern, she said, nervous. He replied in a hurry. What's wrong? She continued. A patient is looking for you. He said he was your friend. Surprised, Lee asked her to take him to the patient. When they arrived, Jung-hwan was lying down, eyes closed, with visible stitches on his chest. The director couldn't believe what he saw, but Jang Han-yul explained. He has a knife wound and was bleeding, but he did the first aid himself. Shortly before passing out, he said he was poisoned. Do you happen to know this patient? Lee took a deep breath and replied, I only know him as the son of a great friend of my father's. Relieved, she bowed to leave, but the professor requested, if anyone asks, just say he's my friend. I'll take care of this. Alone, the director observed Jung-hwan and thought, Khaled, I never imagined seeing him like this, even here in Korea. He then called reporter Kim. As soon as he answered, the question came straight, what happened? Lee replied, Jung-hwan is here. He was wounded by a knife and poisoned. What is going on? Kim reacted furiously. Seriously? Those bastards? The professor interrupted him. Don't get agitated. I just want to know if you know the circumstances. This can't leak, right? Kim confirmed. That's right. I'll come over immediately. A little while later, Jung-hwan began to regain consciousness. A mocking voice sounded, Khaled, of all people ending up like this. I know you're awake. He thought it was Professor Lee, but heard. He went into surgery. A burly man with a wide smile stood before him. He said your life isn't in danger. You can even walk with an escort. By the way, that old man you took care of had his spine broken. He will depend on a wheelchair forever. The other two won't have a normal life anymore either. Well, they got what they deserved. The reporter leaned even closer. Anyway, don't you have something to give me? The hospital director is confessing everything, so you must have an ace up your sleeve, right? Jung-hwan pulled out his cell phone and replied, I have an entire video of the club. I filmed it in a way that no one can tell it was me. He handed over the device and explained, the problem is that it needs to be a valid source to be accepted as evidence. The use is still ambiguous. Kim analyzed it and smiled. A strategy to release it to the press first? Don't worry. Just say it's to protect the informant. But he soon became serious. The prosecution will be in an uproar about this. Aren't you going to end up picking a fight with the superiors? Prosecutors aren't mercenaries paid per case. You could handle this calmly too. Why do you keep taking risks like this to investigate? Suddenly, Kim stopped and looked behind him, surprised. A man had appeared at the door. He held up his credentials and spoke seriously. I am from the Seoul Central Prosecutor's office. Prosecutor Lee Jung-hwan is here, isn't he? I would like to have a word. That man was Prosecutor Heo Jin-seong. Without waiting, he entered, maintaining a serious demeanor. Seeing Jung-hwan lying in bed, he asked, How are you feeling? Our protagonist replied that he was better. Without preamble, Heo stated, The deputy chief and the chief prosecutor asked me to check your condition and bring you in if you were fit. I spoke to the nurse and she said you can be discharged now. Then, he stared firmly and ordered, Pack your things and let's go. At the prosecutor's office building, everyone was gathered around the table. Jung-hwan stood in front and asked if he had been summoned. One of the men commented, Maybe I should have told him to rest more before coming. Lee Soo-yeon was shocked to see him. The protagonist, in an almost dramatic manner, had appeared with his clothes still stained with blood, displaying the cuts, and was received as if it were a scene of mockery. Coughing, someone asked if he had received treatment. But then Woo Byung-jin snapped, What in the world is this prosecutor doing? Yoo Myung-woo interrupted him. Leaving that aside, what was the reason for going to the club with the hospital director on that occasion? You investigated the director directly, and in the end, you let him go, didn't you? Jung-hwan responded that there was something to confirm. Besides the physical evidence of the surgeries, he had obtained statements from detained employees that linked the director to the Coca Club. Yoo frowned. So the hospital director obediently followed you out? When he heard the confirmation, he exploded. That makes no sense! The two stared at each other for a few moments until Jung-hwan said, The hospital director will turn himself in soon. The chief prosecutor retorted, Then, as you say, Why didn't you ask for police cooperation when going to a scene with such suspicion of crime? The protagonist explained that he had reviewed the previous prosecutor's records, and since there were problems at the club but never punishment, he judged that the local police's negligence might have played a significant role. Yu irritably tapped his fingers on the table. You probably never thought about this, but the police and we follow principles of investigation. These rules that seem unnecessary are what give legitimacy to our authority as prosecutors. But you ignore everything and act alone? Are you trying to turn the prosecutor's office into a disorganized mess? In a respectful yet firm tone, Younghwan replied, "Prosecutors investigate crimes and arrest criminals. By doing that, we keep citizens safe. That's all there is to it. You didn't let up. Your ideals seem firm. So let me ask, if a law could harm innocent people, would that law be bad?" Younghwan narrowed his eyes and replied, "No, there is no such thing as a bad law from the start." Everyone was surprised when he added, "When bad people take possession of the law and use it, that is when it becomes bad. It's like weapons and swords. If we are prosecutors who truly protect the law, we must prevent it from being used maliciously, punish the guilty, and protect the people." Wu Beom-jin, the deputy chief, waved his hand dismissively. "You spent too much time abroad, full of pretension. That's why you handle work this way. I understand what you think, now leave." The two partners were in the hallway. Lee Soo-yeon thanked him for his effort, which Jung-hwan didn't immediately understand. "You drew the attention instead of me. It was a bit much, but it wasn't wrong. You acted well as a senior today." The protagonist apologized, remembering that she had been reprimanded along with him because of something he himself started, but quickly added, "I didn't do this just to draw attention." Soo-yeon replied, "It seems not. But, well, as the supervising prosecutor, if I thought your investigation methods were inefficient, I would have used my authority to stop you. This incident made me trust you a little more, and the results were good too. As the person responsible, this was the result of my choice, so don't worry." Jung-hwan looked at her differently at that moment. Before, he thought she was fragile, but now he saw her as someone resolute. Suddenly, Soo-yeon asked in astonishment if he remembered the American man who was among the arrested. "I remember. Andy Rogers, said to be the club's financier. Why do you ask about him?" She explained that it would be difficult to detain him, not only because he was American, but because the charges weren't clear. Jung-hwan was puzzled. "What? He was clearly passed out from drugs, don't tell me." Soo-yeon interrupted him. "It's unpleasant, but they say he had only been drinking too much." Also, the drug test came back negative. The protagonist frowned. There's a possibility that someone powerful in the prosecutor's office or the police manipulated the results. She looked around, making sure they were alone, and confirmed that she thought the same way. Before the results came out, Chief Prosecutor Yoon seems to have spoken with Andy Rogers through the head of the Violent Crimes Unit. Chief Prosecutor Yoon is the person I respect the most. But perhaps we have to suspect both the deputy chief and the chief prosecutor. Young-hwan clenched his teeth, bothered. The connection came to light too quickly. It wasn't bad, but dangerous. At that moment, he remembered that Chief Seo Gishael had mentioned he had something to give him. As if on cue, his phone vibrated. It was a message from the detective. "Prosecutor, he's waiting now on the first floor. He has something to give you." Without wasting time, Young-hwan went there. Inside a car, Seo introduced himself. "I'm Chief Seo Gicheol from the Metropolitan Investigation Unit." Lee also introduced herself, stating that she worked with Young-hwan. Soon after, Seo handed over a bag containing a key. "It's this. We got it from a man we arrested at the port." Young-hwan looked closely. It seemed strangely familiar. "Seriously," he asked. "This somehow looks like something I know." Seo and Lee exchanged surprised glances. The prosecutor pointed to the bag. "Can I take it?" The detective assented. "I came specifically to give it to you, prosecutor. Seeing how you investigated last time, even small clues seem useful. To be honest, other police officers and prosecutors still make me uncomfortable. Anyway, in exchange, please call me the next time you go out." The partners got out of the car in silence. At that moment, Young-hwan received a call from the chief prosecutor. "Is there a problem?" "Yes, chief prosecutor. This is Lee Jung-hwan." The voice on the other end asked him to come to the Masayoung apartment building in an hour. He had just invited him to dinner. Soo-yeon, surprised, asked what had happened. When she heard the explanation, she was even more shocked. "Huh? Even his house? And dinner on top of that? Why?" But that was an answer even Young-hwan didn't have. Arriving at the location, the prosecutor was served a cup of tea. Yoon Myung-woo commented, "It's good that you changed your clothes before coming. Why do you think I called you?" Young-hwan answered bluntly, "Are you calling me to give me a disciplinary transfer to the countryside because of this incident, or to recommend that I resign as a prosecutor?" The chief prosecutor found it funny. "Who am I to try to dismiss a state-appointed prosecutor? I don't have that authority." Young-hwan scoffed, believing it would be a transfer then. You laughed even more. "Are you trying to joke with me? You haven't lived life just watching police movies." Jung-hwan, serious, asked, What exactly do you intend? You didn't think I was someone who fit into the prosecutor's office, did you? Yu took a sip of coffee and replied, Prosecutor Lee Jungwon, actually, I already know who you are. You were the class valedictorian at the training institute, right? Do you remember the institute director back then? Jungwon frowned. The man continued, I had never seen that director talk so much about a student, but 10 years ago he praised one student until he was breathless. That student was you. Jungwon was surprised. So much time had passed that he himself barely remembered. Yu Myung-woo continued, Since then, whenever I saw junior prosecutors, I would ask the same question I asked you today. But 10 years ago and today, you gave the same answer. I have never seen a prosecutor investigate like you. You could have followed many paths, but you chose the prosecutor's office. Why? The protagonist maintained his suspicious gaze, trying to understand how far this would go. Yu concluded, You need to be honest to get what you want from me, don't you think? Jungwon asked directly, Do you know what I want? Yu replied without hesitation, Independent Investigation Authority. The prosecutor immediately wondered if Soo-yeon had told him something, but he knew she only had knowledge of part of it. The name that came to mind was Seo Gi-cheol. If the entire investigation process came to light and Chief Prosecutor Yoon was in collusion with the club gang, he might have to let everyone go. It was then that Yu turned the tables with another statement. For your mother's revenge, right? Jungwon's eyes widened. He turned to the chief prosecutor, full of anger. Yu observed, Your eyes changed. Why did I say something wrong? For revenge? Is that just the legal punishment you chose? Restoring your mother's honor and punishing the guilty by law is a prosecutor's great cause? But you know that personal emotions shouldn't mix with investigations, right? Jungwon trembled his lips, trying to contain his fury. He clenched his fists and replied, If revenge were the only purpose from the beginning, I would have already dealt with those who did that to my mother. What I want is not to vent, but to reveal the truth and give them the appropriate punishment to clear the injustice against my mother. Yu stared at him in silence for a few seconds before provoking, And do you think your mother would be satisfied with that kind of behavior? Jungwon raised his eyes and countered, I also have a question. Yu replied calmly, Resolve all your curiosities before eating. That way you won't get sick. The protagonist, Firm, asked bluntly, Do you know Andy Rogers, who was involved in this Coca Club case?